We are very honored. We're going to have our friend Zoe on from People's Dispatch, giving us quite a bit of information about what's going on in Colombia, where the whole country is just being rocked by strikes, by protests, demonstrations, and brutal repression. And we're also going to be joined by Lillian House, who you may remember if you've seen before on the Freedom Side Live from Denver, one of a number of activists facing decades in prison simply for protesting police brutality. Some very important and very encouraging developments in that case as well. So all of that and more coming up here on the Freedom Side Live on Breakthrough News. So if you get a chance, go ahead, hit that share button so whoever is following you is following us. And if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure that you hit subscribe, become a subscriber, hit the bell so you get alerts. So that way, everything that we do from Breakthrough News will come directly to you. You won't have to go looking for it. So, Rania, to start here, and there's, of course, many ways we could start. There's so much we could talk about, but something you were mentioning to me earlier today is the Secretary of State of the United States, Anthony Blinken. Is it Anthony or Antony Blinken? One
Anthony.
Of them. Anthony. It's Anthony.
There's
like
only
Mark
a T.
Anthony.
Yeah, Anthony
Okay.
Blinken.
Okay, Anthony Blinken. I want to get people's names right, even if I don't like them.
I actually like the idea of butchering easy names because mine gets butchered so much. So.
I hear you. Every other day, someone thinks my last name is Puryear.
That's
sure why.
Actually very cool sounding.
It is cool sounding, although I wouldn't want to have the same last name as a French fancy water, really, I don't think. Puryear works for me.
I can't drink it. It's the bubbly water. It's the bubbly water. I can't drink it because I feel like it's not refreshing. Yeah, but it's like not refreshing to me because when I drink water, I want to like chug water because I'm thirsty. I can't do that if there's bubbles in it.
Oh, so you don't want to sip. So basically what you're saying is you don't want a classy drink.
No, I want to like chug it after a workout. Can you imagine after a workout trying to chug that? Wow, how painful that must be. No.
In a way I can, because I remember back when I was like a high school athlete, where you would like play a game and then come home and there's like a Coke in the fridge or something. You just like chug a Coke as if that was healthy. So it has to be somewhat similar because it's a
Breakthrough News brought to you by non-bubbly water.
Well, I was trying to get you to start talking about Anthony Blinken and you took it to Puryear. I wanted you to help tell our listeners some of the things that were rightfully upsetting you about this man's behavior.
You got to start off light, right, before you go in hard. So I was just trying to lighten the mood before I get angry, because I'm about to get angry. Anthony Blinken makes me very angry.
Well, I mean, I'm ready. So, tell me, what was he doing? I have not been following him. I don't follow this man.
So he's been like gallivanting around the world and doing Zoom calls and then meeting with various diplomats and just moralizing, doing interviews, moralizing. So Anthony Blinken is the Secretary of State, and he fits in very well with his new role. He's one of the most hawkish people in the Biden administration. He's been a longtime Biden advisor. When Biden was a senator, he helped whip votes. He helped Joe Biden whip votes from Democrats in the Senate to vote for the Iraq War. He was an advisor to Vice President Joe Biden under the Obama administration and played a pretty instrumental role in convincing his bosses that, yes, we should intervene in Libya, ended in a disaster. Yes, we should intervene in Syria. Yes, let's intervene everywhere. So he's very much a liberal, hawkish liberal interventionist. And so he's very hawkish against Russia, very hawkish against China. And he's been giving these interviews and making these statements, and we can watch a couple of them where he's just going on and on. China's such an aggressive country. It's becoming increasingly aggressive, becoming increasingly terrible, bad human rights record. Same with Russia. And this is all while, like, as we're going to see later on in this show that we have right now, as in the U.S., police officers not only keep shooting and killing unarmed adults. Recently, we'll be talking about the show is police killing a baby. Police shot and killed a baby in this past week in America. And we have a Secretary of State who's running around saying we have to police the world and everybody should fear Russia and China, and being extremely aggressive. We have to ramp up our security aid to Ukraine, which really just means arming various groups to fight the Russians, groups that include neo-Nazis. The policies towards Latin America, very similar. They haven't really changed since, Trump. So anyways, I just want to watch a couple of these clips that that we've put together of Antony Blinken, and then maybe we can react to them. And that's where the anger will come in. You'll see what I'm talking about in just a moment.
I will see over the last several years is China acting more repressively at home and more aggressively abroad. That is a fact. Russia acts recklessly or aggressively, as it did with the SolarWinds cyber intrusion, as it did with interference in our elections, as it did with what it's done to Mr. Navalny, then we will respond.
So it looks like from my end, these clips didn't come out exactly as they should have, but you heard Antony Blinken's voice, just basically giving these interviews about Russia and China, and they're becoming increasingly aggressive. And as I said, our police officers in America just shot and killed a baby.
Yeah.
Another police officer just got off or was reinstated to his job after shooting and killing Rayshard Brooks. I mean, this is happening across the country. We imprison more people in America in the proportion of our population than any other country in the world. We have 25% of the world's prisoners, but only 5% of the world's population.
Yes.
Our people in America, we're supposed to be the richest country in the world, but tens of thousands of people in America die every year because they can't access health care because we have a privatized health insurance industry that puts profits before people. I mean, you could go on and on and on. We have an insane number of children that go to bed hungry in America because we have a greedy economic system that doesn't care and would prefer, oligarchs continue to hoard their wealth. I mean, it's just unbelievable to see that sort of rhetoric. And I know it, it's not shocking. It's just, it's irritating and infuriating.
I think that's
because how can you go around pointing a finger and moralizing about China and Russia when look what's happening in our own country?
Well, I mean, you can't really unless you want to be called a hypocrite, but certainly there's a bridge between it all. I mean, it's worth noting that Antony Blinken, in his prior career to this, of many things, he was a part of an investment firm that owns some companies. One of those companies, by the way, is one of the main companies that trains police on when to shoot and puts together these, simulators and simulator trainings that do these wild, various different things that you can choose. We talked about this on the Punch Out. This was last year, right around the time that Blinken was being confirmed. You have to go look it up. But I mean, it really is an unbelievable connection between the two of them. But on that note, I want to bring in our first guest here. Very happy to have with us Mr. Sean Blackmon, who, among other things, is the co-host of one of my favorite shows, By Any Means Necessary. He's an activist. He's an organizer. Very smart guy. Friend of the show. Sean, thank you so much for being with us.
Eugene, Rania, it's a pleasure as always.
Well, Sean, I just want to bring you in maybe on this first question. A little bit of what we're talking about is how do you see this connection between the role the U.S. is playing abroad and the role it plays at home in terms of policing? I mean, obviously, I mentioned a very direct connection there between our Secretary of State and how police get trained to shoot. But I think at both the micro and the macro level, it is one of the more interesting, relationships, I think, to draw attention to.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's like, you all were talking about this baby that was killed. I believe it was a 3-month-old that was killed here. And I thought about all the young people who have been killed by police. I thought about Ayanna Stanley Jones, who was 7 years old when she was killed by police. Tamir Rice was 12. I mean, the movement for Black Lives really started because of the killing of Black youth. I mean, 17-year-old Trayvon Martin by a racist vigilante. And Mike Brown was just newly 18 when Officer Darren Wilson killed him. And so it just shows the depth of inhumanity and racism of policing in this country. And there is a direct connection in terms of U.S. imperialism, because even if we look at the deep repression that's happening in Colombia right now, being directed by the president, Ivan Duque, of course, a U.S. backed president there. in Latin America. Colombia very strategically important because of its, proximity to Venezuela and things like that. And so it's the U.S. that, has several military bases there in Colombia, trains those folks, trains some of those specialized units that's terrorizing demonstrators who are resisting the neoliberal order of Duque right now. And we already know about the U.S. Training and exchanges with Israel and how, those tactics that Israel uses to suppress the Palestinians are taught to U.S. police, which are then directed at us here in the States. I mean, just this past summer in the rebellion against racism, I mean, protesters in the street were being treated as like an enemy force. I mean, it was like a counter insurgency. And so not only does I think that show the connection between U.S. imperialism and domestic policing, it also shows how deeply militarized policing is, and how, I mean, frankly, there's no form of humanity that policing won't crush, because that is precisely why the institution exists.
Well, Rania, in raising the issue of this baby that was killed, I mean, honestly, every time you say it, I'm just, what? Anyway, the story that at least is being put out by the police about why ultimately it's not on them is, well, look, the baby had the wrong father, wrong place, wrong time. If the father wouldn't have been terrible and done whatever he was at least alleged to have done, of course people are innocent until proven guilty, but allegedly he was involved in some violent activity the day before, if he had not, as they allegedly say happened, to open fire on them, that this baby ultimately would have been killed, would not have been killed, and basically ultimately it's not their situation, it's not their fault at all. I mean, I don't want to make it a reach here, Rania. Maybe this is a reach, but it's certainly what my mind went to. I mean, I immediately thought when Anwar al-Awlaki, when his son was killed in that drone strike, and Robert Gibbs, the press secretary under Obama, was like, well, should have had a better father. I mean, it's as if there's just no responsibility at all for the tragic collateral damage of a series of policies that, when you ask how did you even end up where stuff like this happened in the first place, is really the responsibility of those institutions that are now trying to devolve said responsibility.
Rania's muted.
Oh, okay. I could not hear her, so I didn't know.
I have been unmuted. That was my fault. I apologize.
Okay.
I muted myself earlier and forgot to unmute. But no, Eugene, I had the same. Come on, Juan. Come on. I'm not as tech savvy as you are.
Look, sometimes you gotta get booed. What do you want me to say?
You're lucky I was even able to frame myself the way I was. You're lucky you can even see me right now. Everyone knows I'm technologically illiterate. So I had the same reaction, Eugene, that you had to the police response to killing that baby of, oh, well, his dad was bad, which is, my mind immediately went to Robert Gibbs being asked about Obama's drone strike against Anwar al-Awlaki's 16-year-old son. And his response was almost like word for word the same thing. Well, he had a bad dad. He should have had a better father. And it's just also, of course you're saying this about brown and black people, right? If there was some upper middle class, white man who'd committed some crime, which they commit crimes as well, and had his baby in the car and was running away, he would have been treated with kid gloves, and that baby luckily wouldn't, have been killed. And it's just, I think there's a certain dehumanization of poor black and brown people that allows for that kind of rhetoric. But also it just shows you the extent to which we're willing to excuse police, because I'm sure on a lot of people's minds that is a justification. It's like, well, what were they supposed to do? Meanwhile, I keep going back in my mind, especially when it's a child, I keep going back in my mind to Kyle Rittenhouse walking around in Kenosha with an AR-15 after having killed someone in front of several people. And, he walked around untouched and unharmed. And I'm not saying I want police to shoot Kyle Rittenhouse. Why can't that same level of humanity be extended to poor brown and black people in this country? That's why one of the reasons, I actually don't like this rhetoric of white privilege is because I don't think we should be looking at these things as privileges. It shouldn't be a privilege for police not to kill you. That should be a right. Like these should be basic rights. They're not privileges. These are rights that need to be extended to everybody. You shouldn't have to worry that the police are going to shoot and kill you. A baby should not be shot and killed by police. Like, I can't even believe I have to say those words.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like if there's a baby in the car, maybe you should just let it go. Juan in the booth, I have not greeted you yet. Juan, what's up? You're here. Happy to have you. Don't know if there's anything you want to comment on so far. Obviously, there's a lot to all this.
I mean, yeah, I definitely want to comment on it because it's something that like we see the hypocrisy of it. Like with the cop that killed Rayshard Brooks, we're gonna talk about it a little bit later also. But what's the reason why he got instated? He got instated because he didn't get due process. But when do black and brown people get due process? Right? Like the cops play the role of judge, jury, and executioner when it comes to the street. When it comes to like the lives of black and brown people. Like there's no their day in court. How many people are killed before their day in court? How many people are in prison in Rikers right now that haven't received their day in court? But when it's police officers, when it's affluent people, like they get their day. They get to go through the system, right? We know the system is broken, but like a portion of it that's broken is the fact that the police really play a role of executioners in our communities. Like and then we see like these mass movements around policing, and still people dare to say that like the U.S. isn't a racist country. Like it's ridiculous.
I mean, before I even go too far on that one, I want to maybe let's raise this issue of the U.S. not being racist. I don't know if people saw the way that this all played out. It was a very strange sequence of events that took place last week, spilled over into this week. Tim Scott, who is the Republican senator, the junior senator from South Carolina, who is a black man. I honestly can't remember what the context was, but he said that America was not a racist country. So people then started asking politicians, basically Democratic politicians, did they think America was a racist country? So Kamala Harris was asked, Joe Biden was asked, Jim Clyburn was asked. I believe we have both Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris's response, and Mr. Clyburn's response, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we do.
Juan. So maybe we should, for those who didn't see, just let them get a taste here.
Yeah, let me put it up.
I believe that we need to address, well, first of all, no, I don't think America is a racist country, but we also do have to speak truth about the history of racism in our country.
I agree with him on that. I don't think a racist country would have elected Barack Obama as president or Kamala Harris as vice president.
Sean Blackmon, how do you evaluate the two highest ranking African Americans, I believe, in American government and their comments on America being a racist nation?
Look here, man. I just want to know who keeps putting the camera on Grandpappy Jim, man. Like, let that man take a nap. Let him lie down and stop talking this nonsense. Look, man, look, you know, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe that Tim Scott even made that speech. I think it was supposed to be like the Republican response to Biden's address to Congress, you know, when he pushed that you know, those raft of proposals, which I think is interesting in and of itself. And, you know, it's hilarious, the fact that Tim Scott says this ridiculous thing, and then, like, you know, Biden, Harris, Clyburn basically agree with him. You know what I mean? And when I saw it, I said, you know what? People get so upset when you suggest that Democrats and Republicans are more alike than they are different. But here we are seeing them only taking slightly different tacts about something that's obviously true. This country only exists because of white supremacy, because the genocide of indigenous people and the enslavement of African people. And there had to be an ideology of racism that manifested in all kinds of different ways, in pseudoscience and phrenology, and they're measuring, you know, black folks' skulls and how, you know, what that means about brain capacity and intelligence. I mean, entire institutions were built on justifying the mistreatment on everyone who was not white. And so here you have the far right party in this country, the Republicans, outright denying that racism exists. And then you have the center-right party, the Democrats, who may acknowledge, like in Biden's comments, he acknowledged that the U.S. had a racist history. But what did he say was the solution? That we just have to deal with it. We have to find a way to deal with it. Didn't say what that meant. Certainly didn't propose anything concrete as president of the United States that could actually be done to address the impacts of racism in a critical way. But his response basically amounted to, yeah, you know, America was racist, and that really is a shame. But, you know, we can't do nothing with that. You know what I mean? We can't live under that. We can't wear that on our body. We can't get medicine and healthcare from that. And so, as ever, it's not surprising to see that Democrats and Republicans basically agree on this question, because both of them are ruling class parties that are sworn to uphold the same capitalist system. And the fact of them being black, the fact of one being the vice president, even Barack Obama in his own way, he kind of had to acknowledge racism in a way. I think he probably would avoid it altogether if he could. But I mean, look at his orientation towards the movement for Black Lives that exploded on his watch.
Right.
Not George Bush, not Ronald Reagan or any racist Republican. And he basically did everything he could to undermine and stigmatize it, even to this day when he was flapping his gums about, defund the police being empty rhetoric. Mm-hmm. And so the last thing I want to say, because particularly among young Black folks who are constantly getting this message of, Black excellence and these petty bourgeois strivings and getting a, quote, seat at the table. If you want a seat at the table, that's the price. You have to pretend that racism don't exist in this country. You have to be like Lloyd Austin and be willing to be the finger on the trigger of the never-ending war machine. That's the price of having a seat at the table.
Yeah, I think that's, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it speaks to your point about capitalism. I mean, basically, they don't want to have to do anything, because to admit that America is obviously racist, you have to get beyond the surface. I mean, Clyburn, well, I don't think a racist country would have voted for Obama or whatever.
It ain't even South Carolina.
But, the reality we could all prove, I mean, Black people are disproportionately unemployed, disproportionately underemployed, disproportionately in low-wage work, disproportionately arrested, disproportionately in prison, disproportionately executed. We have the highest rates of diabetes, hypertension, many types of cancers. So when you really look at the reality of racism in America, it's a glaring red lights flashing indictment of capitalism and the unbelievable inequalities it has committed in the service of its own profit making. And they know that. They aren't dumb. But they talk about a lot of this stuff in their speeches. So if they come out and say, yeah, of course America's racist, they know Republicans are going to say, well, how is America racist? Didn't we have a Black president? Aren't you Vice President, Miss Harris? How are we racist? How are we racist then? And the only answer you could give is the obvious one, the actual reality of Black people in America. But once you start laying that out, you got to go beyond, and this is something we've talked about so much, Rania, you have to go beyond sort of just the surface level stuff, which is where they thrive, and sort of surface level diversity, and get real serious into the nitty gritty about how and why all these different disparities exist. And it creates a whole new set of can of worms that they don't want to touch.
And they also, of course, have benefit from this idea that we had racism, but we've really gotten past it as well, because it is that ongoing structural racism that allows for all of those inequalities to continue without people caring. And it also, the reason America is even a rich country, on top of its past sins, like the genocide of Native Americans and slavery, that's the only reason America is wealthy. It was literally built by slave labor. So they saved a lot, right? From not having to pay people, but also from stealing from the developing world. That's how all of Europe has the infrastructure and wealth that it has. All of those Scandinavian countries that so many people like to say we want to be like, because they have some really good social safety net policies that we want to replicate in America. Those are countries that have the wealth they have because they stole it. Yep. And they were able to steal it because racism allowed for the framework to make it okay to steal from people in brown and black countries and kill them. The UK got very rich off of India. And you needed those racist narratives about India for people in the UK to be okay with, causing mass death and starvation so that they could steal their resources and labor. So it needs to, I love when we have these conversations that we always bring it back to capitalism, because that's at the end of the day what this is about. To acknowledge that America continues to be a racist country would be to acknowledge why it's a structurally racist country. And that is because of capitalism. Capitalism requires racism. It needs it.
I just want to remind people also that Jim Clyburn is the representative who said that he had never met a black socialist. So the implication was that there are no black socialists and that somehow socialism is like anti-black or whatever it may be. I mean, the level of ridiculousness of this individual, I don't even know.
See, but like, Eugene, are you like, who upsets you more? Are you more irritated by this sort of like nonsense right-wing narrative from the Tim Scott types or from the Clyburn Kamala Harris types?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like I'm equally irritated, but in different ways. Like when Tim Scott, I'm irritated at him because I feel like, come on, buddy. Really?
Right.
Like, this is what you're doing? Like, the very fact that, like, you have even bought into this American persona to the level that you're here. And then I'm frustrated with the Clyburn Harris one because you look at their careers, which rhetorically have been built on obvious reputations of many of these things that they're saying now, and yet they continue to say them in the service of empire, in the service of capitalism, in the service of the system. And it just seems so duplicitous and so calculating and so opportunistic. And I guess it frustrates me in both ways, Rania, because it reminds me of the impact of the destruction through, the COINTELPRO and the brutality and the mass incarceration that so eliminated the historical, potent, radical critique that has emerged from the black community so many times over the years to really be the standard bearer, and perhaps now as well, the standard bearer for almost all progressive movements, right, to kick it off. And these are the fruits of the destruction of that movement and the attempt to build this, pro-capitalist movement inside the black community. It's got two wings, of course, and it's being represented by these two people. And it's just so transparently ridiculous, vis-a-vis the actual challenges that are facing the community. So it's almost like which one I'm more annoyed by. It's sort of like which one did I hear most recently, because they both speak to just how politics has totally failed black working class people in this country, but not by accident, by design, and on the deaths and the bones of so many people who sacrificed and struggled only to be victimized by the system. So I don't know, it's a little bit of a rant, but believe me, right now I'm probably most annoyed with Clyburn because just hearing it, oh my God.
That's the first time I heard that not from a white person. How is the U.S. racist if Obama got elected? But Eugene, I got a better rebuttal than Clyburn. How is the U.S. racist if Captain America is black? Think about that.
Or Superman. I thought it was Superman.
Rania.
Okay, well,
I was hearing.
What are you even talking about, Rania?
I think there was a black Superman in like an alternate universe, but not like the mainline continuity.
I don't know.
Well, whoever you're listening to on the radio, Rania, is wrong. Are you listening to Rush Limbaugh?
Oh God.
Too soon?
No, never too soon.
Not at all. That's right on time.
May he rest in hell. You guys, we have to give a shout out. To two people who in the super chat. Y'all want a shout out, you just gotta use the super chat and throw some money at us. That's all it takes. We've got Ash Kit. Thank you, Ash Kit, for the super chat. And the comment is seize the means of production.
Okay.
Can't disagree with that. We're with you, buddy. And we've got Alu Adofin. Thank you as well for the super chat contribution. Definitely. And we got a nice comment of keep it up with a little fun, like animated emoji that's lifting weights and sweating. Oh, it's an avocado. Sorry,
is that Black Superman?
Avocado.
Is that the
I
Black
appreciate
Superman
that,
emoji?
Ash Olu. We appreciate y'all. We appreciate everybody who is watching us, everyone in the chat, period. Certainly everyone in the super chat, and everyone who has recently gone to patreon.com/breakthrough news and become a patron. But the Captain America. You know, Sean, why don't you comment first and foremost about what, I mean, I heard that, you know, he's struggling to get bank loans. I mean, Captain America, I guess it doesn't really count for that much.
Yeah, you know, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the way they dealt with the racism question, I mean, it was a lot more sophisticated than you would expect from like Marvel, right?
Right.
And for people who may not know, the Falcon's character is actually from Louisiana. And so a part of the story is that, you know, he comes from like this fishing family, and they have this boat. They come from like this small knit black community. And, you know, they gotta, you know, sell the boat. They're going through financial hard times. And he comes to his sister, who's been holding this down since he like disappeared during the blip. And he's like, hey, we'll just go get a loan. He's like, I'm the Falcon. I'm literally an Avenger. They're going to give me a loan. I guess this bank didn't talk to Jim Clyburn because, you know, buddy, the teller, the dude who took his application, he recognized him, but he was like, we're not finna give you no money, though.
Yo.
And so, you know, it was in the ending, you know, spoiler alert for people who haven't seen it, but it's been a couple weeks. So. And at the end of the show, he kind of like, because he struggles with, well, you know, what does it mean to be a black man and to be Captain America? And then there was this black Captain America that didn't nobody tell us about, and y'all made him a political prisoner and experimented on him on some Tuskegee vibe. And he has to like live in obscurity. But he comes to this point where like he's kind of critical of the system, but basically on board with it. You know what I mean? And so, you know, I mean, I thought the show itself was great. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I actually enjoyed it more than WandaVision. But yeah, you know, this is a take on the comics. The Falcon does become Captain America in the comics at one point when Steve Rogers becomes old. And so, I mean, yeah, it's just interesting to see how the broader political climate in the country finds its way into pop culture like this.
Yeah, almost every show now is trying to work in something. I mean, even the cop shows, you know, are trying to find a way to work in Black Lives Matter or whatever they want to call it, or however they want to look at it. I mean, it really has been interesting to see, and I think you're right there about Marvel. I mean, Marvel is always, it's sort of like the Black Panther, you know what I mean? They kind of want to come to the edge of some level of social commentary, but they don't want to do too much.
I don't know.
So the CIA agent is a hero, you know, go ahead, Juan.
I feel like, honestly, it like the social commentary and Falcon and the Winter Soldier was definitely better than in Black Panther. Like
Agreed.
Like it was the way, like the interactions. There was one point he's having an argument with Winter Soldier, and he like steps outside and they're arguing outside, and the cops pull by and they like pull out their gun and they go to Winter Soldier, who is a white man, right? They're like, "Is this man bothering you?" Like right away. And then the cop is like realizes that it's like Falcon, and he's like, "Oh wait, my bad. I didn't know who you were. Like I didn't know who you was. That was my mistake." He gets a gun pulled on him. Like, wow. I don't know. I felt like Black Panther, and I might get attacked for this.
Go ahead.
But I feel like Black Panther was definitely like, I don't know who that was for. Ooh. Like, really? Ooh. Like, I don't know who that was for. I felt like that was more for like white folks than it was for anybody else. It was like this lip service that.
That's honestly, one in the booth right there.
I'm with you.
Like honestly, like I was so mad. I was so mad with Killmonger. The way that they represented him as a villain had nothing to do with the actual politics.
You're spoiling. Hold on, spoiler alerts. I have not seen this show.
No, this was 3 years ago.
That came out like 6 years ago.
This was 3 years
like,
ago.
We're wilding. Ryan, you're not gonna see it. You're not gonna see it. You and Kay. You and Kay are not gonna watch this movie. Oh, Kay watched the movie and you didn't. That's a problem.
You're gonna have to explain it.
Also, I was having to fix. I don't know if you guys can tell. I'm having like a light. The sun is destroying my shot.
I thought you had Michael Bay doing your camera. I thought you was getting the trying to get the.
It's like the sun
flares.
is like slowly taking over my face.
Eugene can't see you.
It'll eventually pass. Eugene can't see. It'll eventually pass, but I look like I'm being like eaten by the light of the sun.
I'm just kind of imagining what it could potentially be like
for y'all. For everybody on the other side of this. Listen to the Other Side, coming to you soon.
Great podcast.
If you become
only.
if you become a patron, you get to listen to the Other Side podcast. But if for the folks that are on the other side of this, Eugene is currently staring at a camera, and there's no monitor for him to see, so he's just
Can't see any of
talking
us.
to
This is
a
the
wall.
Apollo 13
Totally
version
blind.
of the Freedom Side Live. I'm just up here. Houston
talking to
is
a
on is in my
camera.
ear.
Talking to a camera.
right,
It's
sure,
like
well,
he's
where's
not
that
just
hair?
looking at
Can
a
I
wall.
contact that
There's
hair?
a
Wait.
camera there.
But I had a point. Like the Killmonger, right? Like the way that they showed that his character was bad, at least in like the way I saw the movie, was violence against women. Like he killed his girlfriend in it, and then he was gonna attack T'Challa's mom, right? And Shuri. Like that's the way that they show he was a villain. Like his character was flawed and stuff, but like the politics that he was bringing forward were more radical, were the most radical politics in the MCU. And what happened at the end? Wakanda joined the UN. That was like ooh, like,
and T'Challa opened a STEM research center. Like
yeah.
They're an open country now. They're an open country now.
They started a nonprofit. They
Yeah.
joined the UN and started a nonprofit.
They did.
But I've seen it, right? I'm not like, okay, I just want to clarify.
Wait,
Like,
you
I don't
have
want
seen
anyone
it.
to think I was. Yeah. I'm not like living under a rock. I was just saying, don't spoil it for.
Oh, you were
the
talking about
but I
Falcon and
realized-
Winter Soldier. We thought you meant
I
Black
also
Panther.
was a little. I was also a little distracted because of my light situation, but that's better now.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's okay. Eugene, I'd love to actually. We should scare Eugene because he can't see any of us. We should like scare him into thinking it's a lot worse. You have
I'm
no
actually
idea.
sitting in the dark right now. Yeah.
Yeah, we can even see Sean. Sean is just.
I mean, as
Yeah,
long
but
as you can hear Sean, that's
I really,
all we need.
yeah, you know
Great
what?
voice.
I agree with you about the politics of Black Panther, man, in a sense, because I think Disney very shrewdly understood the moment that this movie was being released in politically and culturally, and they knew how people would react to it if it was framed a certain way, and so they presented it as if it had some kind of deep political substance, but like it didn't, right?
not
And
at all.
because we're talking about Wakanda, this fictional African country with what I think in that universe is the most valuable resource, vibranium, extremely advanced, and so, but completely shut themselves off. So you're telling me that slavery, colonialism, imperialism, and neocolonialism have been violently raging around you for centuries, and y'all was just chilling.
And Killmonger
Right?
brought that up. He brought that up in
Yeah,
the movie.
and-
He's like, "Where were you?"
But see, here's the
He's
thing.
like, "Where were
I
you?"
feel-
Well, you
I
know,
feel
to
like the
eat-
points,
Go
like,
ahead.
sorry, I was just gonna say, I feel like the good points that Killmonger made, it's almost like they tried to make him into like a leftist gone bad.
Yeah.
Like, this is why you shouldn't have these beliefs.
Uh-huh.
And that was like really obviously frustrating to watch. And then the way the CIA guy was the hero was obviously like, very upsetting because you're talking about Africa, where the CIA has literally murdered the leaders of countries that tried to be independent and has been a very destructive force. That's being very generous, actually.
Yeah.
Just to call them a destructive force. So to try and portray the CIA or anything connected to U.S. militarism as something positive was just disgusting. That was disgusting.
And
Like,
like,
you're teaching a generation of young people to like idolize the CIA. But I guess we all grew up with a lot of movies like that too.
Yeah.
Like
That's true.
Yeah.
We
Where the
broke
CIA were the
through,
good guys.
if you will. Juan, you want to get back in there?
Yeah, and not to like completely bash it, right? Because like I do feel like is it might be in my top 5 like MCU movies, but you know, Ryan Coogler did his thing. Like it was a beautiful movie aesthetically. Like the fight scenes were amazing. Like it wasn't like that it was bad, but like the political aspect of it was not there, and like the character that was that Killmonger, like they made him seem like just like a powder keg, really. Like he was ready to blow at any time. He was an unstable character. You see like the way that he reacted, and it was really like to me a caricature of the left, or like a caricature of like what the Black Panther Party was, because when he got into power, he was going to share the resources of Wakanda with all oppressed countries. But it's like, how is that the villain?
Yeah.
Right? How is that the villain Meanwhile, you have like literally the U.S. trying to get its way into this sovereign country the entire time. That's why the agent was there, because they were trying to take control of the resource.
Yeah, I mean, well, you know, we saw the thing with that last Christopher Nolan Batman,
Also,
the Bane character.
There
I mean,
was
this is a
also an
normal trope.
elitism. There was also an elitism to it, right? Like,
Yeah.
wasn't Killmonger from like a poor background?
Yeah.
Well, he had
he
been
was, like, from the
raised
projects
right,
or
but he was technically
Wakanda.
royalty. I don't know. Someone explain it. I don't know.
He
right,
was
but he didn't
Wakanda.
know,
He-
right? But he was raised poor. Like, it's like the
Yeah.
idea was also. I
He
feel
grew up
like
in
it was
Oakland.
also playing on this notion, and this exists in the U.S., right? This like sort of divide between even like immigrants, like upper class immigrants that'll come to the U.S., kind of like looking down on Black Americans.
Yeah.
Like, oh, like there's just something like inferior about them because they're poor and Black. So there's like this class element that played out that I didn't like either in Black Panther, where he's this like, he didn't know his real background, but he grew up culturally in essentially a poor black background. And then the sort of like upper class prince, if you will, is like the hero, and he works with the CIA. And that dynamic was just like dirty too. That was
Well,
dirty.
Michael B. Jordan is
underhanded.
evening it all out, because as you may or may not know, he's appearing now in the new Tom Clancy film and Amazon as John Clark. So he is now going deeply into the world of CIA propaganda with this new, very slick-looking action film, where all I really know about is he murders a lot of people, and I'm sure since it's a Tom Clancy piece, it's just quasi-right-wing politics. But just speaks to the overall point about the cultural role being played by Hollywood in the most general sense, Sean.
Yeah, man. Y'all ever notice Michael B. Jordan's not really that good of an actor?
Don't.
Yeah, he's
Well,
not.
I feel like, Sean, I tried to tell you that for years.
You
and
did.
You resisted me.
You did. And you know, I feel like one of his best performances
But you
was
see,
when he
Sean,
played.
Why? Like, white people could be bad actors, but Black people gotta be good actors now. Like, that's not fair. Like, tell me,
Yes.
tell me why Brad Pitt is an actor. Tell me why Brad Pitt is an actor.
Hold on.
You don't think
It's
he's
a
a good
different
actor?
standard because
He played one role.
Hollywood only-
He's the same
Hollywood only
person
lets
in
us
every
have
movie.
4 black
And
actors
he's
at a time.
hungry.
True.
Every movie he's hungry and he's Brad Pitt. He eat in every
He's a
movie
hungry
and he talk the same.
Sean,
He
go
might
ahead.
be a
Avengers
different
was
person in 3
basically
movies.
the same, but he was great.
Please continue your
I'm
broader
just
point,
saying.
Sean.
I'm just saying, but yeah, so Michael B. Jordan, I feel like his best performance really was when he played Oscar Grant in Fruitvale Station. But that makes sense because like Oscar
Amazing
Grant was
movie.
like an everyday person.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so when you sound like an everyday person, then that kind of helps. But yeah, you know, I couldn't really get down with Killmonger because he was motivated by vengeance. He wasn't motivated by principle. And correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't he like a mercenary before
Yeah,
he decided
he
he
was.
wanted to
Yes.
reclaim
He
the
was in the
throne?
military first. And that's
Yeah,
then he got
so,
all the
like, I
little
don't know,
things. He
to-
put like he scarred himself
Yeah,
for
for
every
each
person he
kill.
killed.
Yeah, for each
Insane.
person he killed.
Disgusting.
And then, you know, they got to eat the special flower or whatever to become Black Panther. And he had them destroy all the flowers.
Mhm.
So he's like destroying the culture and all this of this thing that he's supposed to be reclaiming. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a movie about like 2 cousins fighting for like the right to the throne. And like, I just
I
don't.
have to
and
say,
while that- go ahead.
I do appreciate that like a military mercenary guy ended up fighting a CIA guy in a way, because it does end up happening with who the U.S. funds in other countries. Like, do you guys remember in Syria when the moderate rebels that the CIA was funding ended up fighting the moderate rebels that the Pentagon was funding? And it was like I thought that was hilarious, like in a really dark way. Maybe I shouldn't be laughing.
That
at
is very
but-
dark. But it's a fair point. It does happen. The Taliban, of course, is another example of that. But
Yeah.
a little higher stakes in a Marvel movie, but I'm with you.
a little higher, just a little.
Just a touch. For whatever reason, I don't know why this is reminding me of this, but you know, in 2013, one of these moderate rebel groups, Ahrar al-Sham, who's being backed by the United States, did a prisoner swap with the Assad government. And the guy that they swapped for was the person who recruited 3 of the 9/11 hijackers. And I just said, wow. So a U.S.-backed group just freed someone who recruited 3 of the 9/11 hijackers. Talk about irony, hypocrisy. I don't know what's going on with that one, but it does show the malign influence of imperialism and its puppetry has its blowback potential. That's for sure, Rania.
I mean, just a little bit. If you even think about like Al-Qaeda itself, Al-Qaeda wouldn't exist if the U.S. hadn't funded and armed a bunch of terrorist training camps in Afghanistan throughout the 80s so that they could fight the Soviets.
I was going to say someone should make a movie about that, but I realized they did, and it actually made them good, not bad.
No, there was one good movie. That was it. Did it make them good? Did it really make them good?
It definitely made the Taliban good. I mean, at the last 15 minutes, it made them bad, and then it was like, oh, and the Taliban came to power. But no, I think it was mainly pro.
I mean, the Taliban's about to come to power again, and the Taliban is in power now. That's the other thing about the war in Afghanistan. It's like the gift that keeps on giving. America, the Al-Qaeda exists because of American intervention in Afghanistan. The Taliban exists because of American intervention in Afghanistan. And then we spent the last 20 years apparently fighting the Taliban, only to then 20 years later be like, okay, here you go. We can't.
Well, what is the good movie?
Here you go. We can't.
What is the good movie about Afghanistan?
There is no good movie. I thought Charlie Wilson's War was decent. Well, I have a different opinion about Charlie Wilson's War.
Okay.
I think it does a really good job.
I thought you might be Rambo 3 or something.
No. I thought it does a really good job of portraying like the anti-communist agenda as insane as it was, especially when they
It did a terrible job. It completely lionized these ridiculous anti-communist
I didn't think it lionized them.
Oh
I think it made them the misogynist that they were.
No.
It could have gone further. I think it portrayed them as pretty misogynistic.
Yeah, but it basically portrayed them as good. They were doing the right thing, and the only thing that was wrong, as the little credits said it there at the end, is that we left Afghanistan, that we left them to whatever in the 90s and created the Taliban. It was basically like it was all good until we stopped dealing with them in the 90s. I will say, do you know in the 80s who the highest, one of the highest paid like recipients of CIA aid in the Mujahideen was? This guy Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who later became prime minister of Afghanistan at one point. He actually rose to fame for throwing acid in the faces of women at Kabul University.
Wow.
That's who was one of the highest recipients of CIA aid to overthrow the Soviets, or the Soviet-backed government. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say the Soviets. To get rid of the Soviet-backed government was a guy who was throwing acid in women's faces because he didn't think they should go to school. So yeah, America full of lots of hypocrisy, because now, like 40 years later, you're saying you want to stay for the women?
Right.
Like you funded a guy who was throwing acid in their faces 40 years ago.
Anyway. This is random, but maybe a couple years ago, whenever the latest Mortal Kombat game came out, they actually had Rambo as a playable character.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, it would be kind of amazing if after every fatality, it would be like a little tribute to the Mujahideen on the video game screen. Like that's the ultimate finish.
My favorite Mujahideen fighter, Osama bin Laden.
I mean, look, you're trying to choose your fighter. I mean, it honestly does actually make me think, just going back 8 points. The CIA agent, it was also like the only white guy in Black Panther.
Yo,
and it was sort of like, I mean, I saw the video they put out this week. Allegedly, it's a very diverse workforce. I mean, that in and of itself is unbelievable.
There was another white guy. Claw was white.
Okay. Oh yeah, Claw, right. the racist South African. Yeah.
That guy. I mean, sadly, well, we still have them, Elon Musk, right, all around us.
He's gonna be on SNL.
Is that last week or is it?
No, it's this Saturday.
It's this upcoming Saturday.
Yeah, this Saturday.
I might watch.
I bought some Dogecoin.
I just want
for Elon Musk.
I just want to see him bomb. I mean, it seems like it could be great. Like that, I just can't imagine he's going to be good, and so it seems like it'd be quite enjoyable.
He's going to be hot.
He's
going to be like on drugs.
I mean,
is he the one who named his baby like? Is he the one who named his baby like something really weird? Like it doesn't sound like it's pronounced.
Well,
Yeah.
Like
I don't wanna
it
say
sounds like a
anything about
mathematical
baby.
formula.
I
No, it sounds like a mathematical formula
it
or
is.
something.
His name
It's like
is weird.
x squared or something. I don't even.
Hold
I don't know.
on. Y'all saying Elon Musk is gonna be on SNL?
Yeah.
Yes. That's right. How do you feel about that, Sean?
Not great. He wants to coup people.
The
said- he
South
said what? He
African
wants to coup
emerald
people.
fortune of
Yeah.
apartheid.
He said we'll coup whoever we
transitioned
want.
to the rocket fortune.
He said we cool whoever we want.
You guys,
Yes.
The
one of my
Bolivian people
favorite
felt
Hollywood
differently, though.
films. One of my favorite Hollywood films actually came out recently. It was produced by this organization called the CIA. And it's called Humans of CIA. It's a series of episodes about why we should all join. Have you heard of it?
I don't believe that I have. This is like the
You have?
National
It's the woke,
Geographic channel?
the woke video. It's the woke. No, it's the
Oh,
woke
that
video.
was a series?
It was,
Yeah,
oh
it's a
my
part
God,
of
it's
a
a
series.
series. Yes.
That's amazing.
Hold
That's
on. You have to
amazing.
go watch my breakthrough discussion
amazing.
about
It's a
this
series.
on our channel about the woke CIA ad, because we go into the fact, me and Katie Helper go into the fact that it's a series called Humans of CIA. Okay. It's on their YouTube channel. And it like shows you these different diverse individuals. One of them's a gay guy who's like, you know, I'm from a small town. I grew up gay. And I never thought the CIA could be a place for someone like me. But then I went there and they had a rainbow flag. And you're like, what?
Progressive.
I'm essentially paraphrasing what the guy says. And then there's the one that obviously went viral this past week of the Latina cisgendered intersectional woman with generalized anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
She hit on
Imposter
all of
syndrome.
those things.
I mean,
Yeah.
Relatable
just-
though.
Well, obviously,
No, it
I'm not even
ain't.
going to go there. I almost made a great joke and very bad taste.
But this is for Eugene. Eugene, I want to get yours, because me and Eugene have an ongoing, I wouldn't call it a disagreement, but I would say a slight disagreement about the issue of identity politics. I think we mostly agree, but I'm just slightly more against it than Eugene is, for good reason.
I know.
Oh,
but
wow.
I know.
But
I know when I'm getting beat by a cop, I want him to be black.
I mean,
I'm
I
just
think it probably
saying.
doesn't matter that much in the process of being beaten. I mean,
Eugene,
listen,
did you see the
Sean,
CIA
did you agree
video?
with me,
And
or
I
what?
want to. What was your take? What was your take, Eugene? Do you want to join the CIA now that you know? I need to know if Eugene wants to join the CIA now that it's such an inclusive environment.
I'll be honest
for
with you.
people of color.
I did look up the benefit plan.
He
I-
does rock that top button. He
He
does rock that top button.
You know, listen, I don't think they would let me rock the top button. They might think I'm an Iranian agent or something. Yeah,
That's actually true.
look, the video is obviously ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, you know, there's so many things I could say, Rania. I feel like that was such a loaded question. You know, I mean, like, what is identity politics to a
Tell me
degree?
how you
I mean,
really
you know,
feel.
as I said on the Punch Out this week, the patrons only edition of the Punch Out, I mean, imperialism co-opting things is as old as time. I mean, Woodrow Wilson tried to co-opt self-determination, but obviously self-determination is good. The government went to great lengths, spent billions of dollars through the agency of the Ford Foundation, among others, to co-opt Black Power. But it doesn't mean that the Black Power movement was bad. Every Black History Month, we have to look at these disgusting displays of like the DOD talking about how Martin Luther King, 2 years ago they actually said this at the DOD Black History, I'm not making this up, that Martin Luther King would have supported the wars that they had today. And I mean, it's all absolutely ridiculous. It's all absolutely disgusting. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, as long as imperialism is not defeated, it will always co-opt that which it views, or attempt to co-opt that which it views as oppositional. So to me, as it would seem like a lot of heat and light over nothing in many ways in the controversy. It's not really a new or a novel phenomenon. I think it's just the natural phenomenon of the terrain of struggle. Like, if you struggle on any important issue, that it has any level of effectiveness in moving broader social consciousness, if there is a ruling class, they're going to try to get in on it. And I think that we have to be very careful of how we evaluate that, because, you know, as much as we want to say, whatever, the CIA thing is dumb, these DOD things are ridiculous, they're all hypocritical, they're this, that, and the third. I mean, the only reason they're happening is because people from these communities are struggling for recognition, struggling for their own humanity, struggling for democracy in the most general sense. I mean, you know, you look at the rhetoric of the civil rights movement, certainly at the time, you know, as they were saying, many of them, SNCC especially, well, the right to vote is not everything. There's the famous quote, what's the right to vote if you can't, what's the right to sit at a lunch counter if you can't afford the hamburger? So obviously there are deep limitations. And in fact, the inclusion of African Americans as a voting population was then taken and now is used and propagandized in a way to say, well, you know, it shows that the system is good and brought black people in. Obviously, it doesn't show that, but it doesn't mean that they were wrong to fight for voting rights. And so I think that part of the challenge is that there is a identity politics of imperialism that is looking to distort these things, but there's also an identity politics of a resistance to oppression and a struggle for people to be treated equally, a struggle for people to be included, to not have to be humiliated everywhere they go because of who they are. And ultimately, obviously, the system is going to attempt to adopt that. If not, it will become tremendously explosive and something they can't do. So to me, the question that we have to be asked, and this is why I was annoyed with the discourse around this, is not, is this bad? Is it an example of how things are co-opted, whatever, but what does it mean to wage principled struggle against imperialism on important issues like this, knowing that it is possible that they will try to use it with more power and a bigger megaphone and microphone to derail us? And I think that was the question that I feel didn't really get touched on, despite it, to me, the go forward issue being the most important issue, rather than rehashing something that we've seen a million times before and we'll see as we continue to struggle. Until you defeat the enemy, they're going to look for ways to dilute your power.
So I don't think anything you said is wrong. I will add to it, though, that I actually think this was also the CIA, an institution of extreme power, trying to recruit from the millennial generation. And this is the language of millennials, particularly at the kind of places they recruit from. This is the way people at even Ivy League universities talk now. It's like it's a generational language. And the CIA does tend to recruit from higher education kind of places. And this is the language of academia. I mean, anybody who's going to college or has been through college is in their 20s and 30s. This is the language that you've become used to. It's just like culturally, this is how we speak. So I think that's also part of it too, is like trying to recruit in a way that seems attractive to this generation. The thing I think also that I want to point out is I don't know if it's necessarily right to say that imperialism is co-opting identity politics, because identity politics isn't necessarily right-wing or left-wing. It can be both. There's right-wing identity politics. There's also the kind of identity politics that imperialism enforced on places all around the world. I mean, I come from the Middle East. The Middle East was literally cut up into sectarian states by identity, and governments were set up. I mean, as recently as, after we invaded and destroyed the government in Iraq and collapsed the state, what did America replace it with? They replaced it with a sectarian system that literally gives out power by sect, and that caused a civil war. And the same kind of situation in Lebanon with the sort of formula of sectarian identity politics, if you will, structurally, the French set up. So I don't necessarily, maybe it's not new. Maybe it's not new using with like imperialism using identity. And I think it's also, I think it's important to note, like I said, it's not a right or left wing thing. It's how it's used. Like there's white identity politics. What is white supremacy? Right. If not white identity politics? What is the state of Israel? That's identity politics with an army. Like, it is a certain kind of identity based politics. So I don't think it's necessarily right to say they co-opted. And the last thing I'll say about it is, and this is, I think, where you and I maybe have slight disagreement, is I do see the way that identity politics can bury the issue of class. And it's with the kind of liberal way it's used. It's with the sort of liberal obsessive focus on representation and diversity to the exclusion of everything else. And that's where identity politics can be a huge problem, right? Because then everybody, like Jim Clyburn, might tell us, like, it's like, because Obama's president, there's no racism anymore. It's like, well, wait, you're like, that's a very surface level thing. You have to dig deeper. But anyways, I don't know if Sean and Juan want to add anything else on that.
Yeah,
it's been talked about all week.
I'm old enough to remember when racists used to say that there's no more racism because Obama was president. And as it concerns this commercial, I think two things. Number one, honestly, how gross it is to sort of use the image of a Latin woman in this way. She even had the shirt that said "Mija" with the women's liberation on it.
They told her, wear your most Latina shirt. It's like tomorrow we film you where you're most Latino. Now she probably showed up and it was like picture day and it didn't have no back. Like it was just they put it around her.
No background. You know what I'm saying?
sorry, Sean.
And I thought about, I'm like, okay, well, what about all the women in like Guatemala or, you know what I'm saying, or Panama or Chile or El Salvador? I mean, the CIA has killed a lot of women in Latin America alone. We're not even talking about like the rest of the earth. So it's odious in the same way that it is to shoehorn in some like white CIA guy in the Black Panther movie. And also, I think Eugene's right. I mean, the reason why we're seeing this in the framing that we're seeing it is the same reason that Derek Chauvin got charged. It's the same reason that Joe Biden put forth this ambitious raft of policies and whatnot and proposals not long ago. It's because there is like a militant movement that's been in the streets. Millions of folks came into the streets over this past summer. Right. And it's clearly reaching the highest levels of the capitalist state. So do we celebrate the fact that we see this in a commercial? No. But what we do is understand that impact that we're having and then ask ourselves, well, how do we organize at a higher level, strengthen the work that we're doing to elevate the struggle and to actually continue to push for all these things that we're talking about. And if we do that, they could, you know what I'm saying? They could make a movie out of those doggone commercials, human to CIA, and it won't mean nothing.
Right. I mean, the thing is also they're having a hard time recruiting people right now. Like I saw an article last year about how like police chiefs were talking about how they were having a hard time getting people to want to be police officers. I mean, with reason, right? Like the reason, like, because there's a major critique on this institution. Even if you like in your heart of heart want to become a police officer, like right now is not the time, right? Because you feel like you might. It's not that you don't think that you don't think that police are racist or that you think that police are bad, but like you don't want to be criticized about it, right? Because that's the power of the movement right now. So this is them grasping for straws. I saw an article last year in the middle of the pandemic. It was like, oh, you think policing is bad? The answer isn't abolishing the police. You should become a police officer and fix the institution from the inside. And that was on the New York Times, right? So and that to me looked like an ad for the NYPD. And the thing is that when we critique the system, and as the system gets critiqued by more and more people, and even folks that don't really have like a political line, these institutions begin to crumble. Right. And that's what we see now with the rise of police brutality, even like in the middle of the uprising, even now, like the way that the police were like reacting to this thing it's a system that is scared of itself falling apart. Right. So they're not going to change for the good. This is what we get. Right. We get is like a woke CIA ad. But at the end of the day, they're going to be more aggressive. They're going to be more militarized. Because that's the way that capitalism reacts to things. And the state is going to react this way. It's going to become more fascistic.
I think that's
and
true.
Juan, what you're describing is the way that the state will contort and twist and turn itself just to continue to justify its existence. Now, it won't change its form and its function.
No.
It'll just change the superficial part, right? And I'm glad you raised that part because I can't. A couple of years ago, I can't remember what city or town it was. But it was this cat. He was a black police chief, and he was talking to like the Black Lives Matter movement. He was like, "Well, if you got a problem with policing, don't pick up a sign, pick up an application." Right. Like I still remember that. Like this whole idea about like changing it from the inside. And I can't remember the name. And this happened recently. I can't remember the woman's name. This was a black woman who was a cop, and she was fired because she stopped a white cop from putting a chokehold on a black man.
This was a couple years ago. Just now was when when they like dropped the charges on her or something, or they passed a law.
They let her get her pension.
Yeah,
they let her get her pension and stuff. So she's been fighting for. So this was a black person on the inside who was stopping an incident of police abuse and was punished for it for years, right? And to the point where it tried to impact the way that she made a living. And so all this stuff about changing it from the inside, there's no changing from the inside of a system that's racist by its very nature. You cannot do it.
I want to just raise this, which speaks very much to this in terms of this. One thing you all may not know about Rania and I. We were both in Baltimore just after the uprising. And
Wait, where?
people, especially if you're from the Mid-Atlantic, you may remember, you won't remember his name, a guy named Luke Shelley. But he was this guy, he had been deployed to Baltimore as a part of the National Guard during the uprising. And he made all this news because he then became a Baltimore cop. And it was all this news about how this is like the right kind of cop. This is the guy we need. He was talking about how he was so inspired about, you know, what he had seen to try to change policing and the interactions he had. Well, anyway, in a report that came out earlier this year about the use of force by police in Baltimore, this guy, Luke Shelley, right kind of cop, the people that they were recruiting allegedly to improve police after the uprising, had 8 complaints and was involved in 67 use of force incidents.
That's the right cop.
I mean, it just
Yeah,
gives
he
you a
is.
sense of
Not
how
like they
absurd
said.
it is. What's that, Sean?
No, I was saying Juan said, you know, the right kind of cop. I mean, he literally was, just not in the way that they were trying to make it seem. And I mean, isn't Baltimore the same city where they had that big scandal with like their gun recovery unit, and one of the officers was getting ready to testify and then like ended up dying on mysterious circumstances?
Gun Trace Task Force. You know, every single person should go out and get the book, I Got a Monster, which is about the Gun Trace Task Force. Extreme corruption. I mean, they were going all over the city of Baltimore. They were robbing drug dealers, all sorts of people, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They were doing drug deals. They were planning drugs. They were falsely arresting people. And then, yes, in the midst of this trial in the Gun Trace Task Force, which was unearthing many terrible things about Baltimore police, there was one officer who was slated to testify, and the day before he was slated to testify, he was killed in a shootout in very suspicious circumstances. I'll note in the Freedom Side, I can't remember exactly when this was, when we had Tawanda West of West Wednesdays from Baltimore on, she actually spoke at length about this for those who want to go back and hear more about it. She spoke at length about what happened and a lot of the questions around it and how it fits in more broadly to police violence in the city of Baltimore, which I think is super important. But yeah, a lot of questions that were surrounding that as well. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Sean, sorry there, I couldn't hear myself. But anyway, Sean Blackmon, I have to say it was, as always, a huge pleasure to have you here on the show.
We love you, Sean.
Every time you come on, so much to say. We could keep talking to you all night, but I know you got other things you got to do. But I hope everybody checks out your daily Monday through Friday radio show that you co-host by any means necessary.
That's right. Thank you all so much. The pleasure was all mine.
No, the pleasure is all ours. And as we move the show forward, and we're going to continue to move the show forward, if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell. If you're watching somewhere else, go ahead and share it so whoever's following you can follow us. Because next we are very honored to bring on Mariah Parker, who is an Athens County Commissioner, co-host of the podcast Waiting on Reparations, a cultural worker, an organizer, a PhD student, an all-around fantastic person. Mariah, thank you so much for being back with us here on the Freedom Side.
It is a pleasure to be back.
Well, the pleasure is all ours. I mean, there's so many things that we could say, so many places we could start, but maybe just sort of picking up a little bit on where we have been going. I wanted to get your thoughts, Mariah, on this cop who killed Rayshard Brooks, just getting his job back, being reinstated, essentially on a technicality, it seems.
Yeah, so the Civil Service Board of the City of Atlanta found that his termination went against their policies with regards to human personnel matters, that they were supposed to have given him 14 days, and he was fired immediately because he murdered a guy on the job. And so on those grounds, he was reinstated this week, though it is important to know two things, I feel. The conditions of his bond make it so that he's not allowed to possess a firearm, he can't be around other officers, so he can't actually go back to work. So this man, thankfully, is not back on the streets. However, his reinstatement does mean that he is receiving back pay for the time that he was away from the force. He is now on administrative leave, which means he is being paid. He's getting a paid vacation to return to the force, as well as receiving all of his benefits back. And so as much as knowing that he is not reinstated to like working the streets of the city of Atlanta, does bring some relief. The fact that, he is being paid handsomely to, take a vacation while being, actively being charged with murder right now. And so it comes as a great disappointment and sadness to the activists who have fought for justice for Rayshard, to the family of Rayshard Brooks. And it comes as a slap in the face as well, knowing that today Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms released their city budget for fiscal year 2022, which includes a 10% increase to the police budget, wow, including salary increases for police officers, bringing the city up budget, I believe, up to the city budget for policing up to $267 million. And so, they out here killing people, and yet they're being rewarded for their work with increases to their salary and an inflation of their already exorbitant budget. So it's just indicative of the work that we have to do in Democrat-controlled cities like these. People want to say, "Oh, this is what happens in Trump's America." Like, nah, man, this is what happens in America, period. And we're seeing, and as y'all have brought light to in y'all's work, like it's also a global issue.
Right.
We're living under a police state globally. And so we do have our work cut out for us in changing the paradigm here in Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I almost thought it was a joke. I don't know why I thought that. Not that these things don't happen all the time when I saw it. I mean, but hearing about the budget, I mean, it's almost like insult to injury, Mariah. That, I mean, it's one thing to change nothing, but you look at all these places. I think D.C. also, they tried to increase the budget for the police to some degree. I think maybe, I don't know, a few other places it was the same thing. I mean, it would be bad enough if you just did nothing, but it's like, well, not only are we not going to listen to you and defund the police, not only are we not going to just stand pat on these giant billions of dollars we already spent, we're actually going to spend more money on policing, and somehow that is presented as like a reform because they always claim, oh, we're going to change all these things.
They need training. They need
oh,
training.
We're going to hire better cops. We're going to retain the good ones by paying them more. We're going to incentivize people from the city to work in our police department so they're patrolling our own communities. Well, we've tried this and it has not worked. And we do have a mountain and tomes and tomes of expertise writing around, the benefits of trying something new. We've theorized on it. We've tried it in places and implemented solutions that look different and work different and worked better. And yet we're still not learning from the mountains of expertise that movement workers have brought to this conversation.
I mean, well, you mentioned how this like policing is so global, and it's true. I mean, we're going to talk about Colombia in a little bit, but so many police forces around the world are also trained by the U.S. and they're trained in the same tactics. And that's really frightening to think about because like the U.S. also trains, it's also the funding is so amazing too, because I think, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but that something like the LAPD has a bigger budget than some countries' militaries.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the same goes for the NYPD or basically, I'm sure the Atlanta PD. I think it's probably a constant in these big cities across the country, but the fact that I don't think people realize like how much of the budget in cities or in states is going towards policing. In some cases, it's like over 50% of the budget. And you mentioned Democratic cities. Like, yeah, most of the cities in the US are run by Democratic mayors. And the same problem persists. It's not a party issue. And you have, Joe Biden, his administration is talking about giving police more funding.
To investigate themselves when they kill us.
Yeah. Right.
Great. Thank you.
Right. It's right. It's incredible. So go ahead, Eugene.
Well, no, it is incredible. It's just something you said just sparks how I was thinking about Rania. I mean, I'm actually curious, Mariah, like in Athens, what the police presence is like, because it's big cities, but it's also these small towns. Like I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia, another southern college town, and the thing that always sticks with me is like when you graduated from Dare. They took you to this like, I don't know, they had like a party for you or whatever in the park near the high school because you graduated from Dare in 9th grade. And I remember so vividly going to it, and they had a helicopter, and then they had many other weapons, but one was like a Barrett 50 cal. If you don't know rifles, it's an anti-material rifle. It's basically a giant .50 caliber rifle designed to stop big trucks by putting a bullet in the engine block. And they were like, if you do good in school, you too can shoot this giant thing. And they had these armored vehicles there. And I don't know, I've lived there all my life. I just felt like, what do they have any of this for? I'm not sure anything happened. I wonder if it's a similar situation there in Athens.
It is. Even for a town of 140,000 people, we have a tank. We've got drones. We've got all kinds of weapons of war that are at the ready to quell the unrest that comes with underinvesting in communities when the people rise up and they say they're not going to take it anymore. And so I represent one of the quote unquote most dangerous parts of Athens, Georgia. And it is the most policed. If you go 5 miles down the road to the wealthier areas, you don't see there's no cops in sight because they have the most resources. And yet the most under-resourced communities are those that are most heavily policed. And yet we still have problems with organized crime. We have problems with just loitering, just homelessness, basic things that happen when you don't give people the money they need to survive. And I also want to get back to what you were saying about the global nature of the militarization of the police and the occupation of our communities, because even in communities like mine, we had 6 police shootings in 2019. Wow. Surprisingly, none during the pandemic last year. And so people want to say oh, well, we don't have those problems here. People aren't getting killed by the cops here. Why would we defund the police? But it's they all receive the same training from the same national, international agencies. Right. There's this global network and ideology around the way that policing is to be undertaken in our communities. And so even if it isn't happening right now, it is only a matter of time. And we are seeing, tragedies happen in smaller cities like Elizabeth City, North Carolina, Kenosha, Wisconsin. So drawing that attention back to the way that these networks of information and power kind of flow through these training networks, through these training regimes, and ultimately, are embedded in the ideology of policing. It's not something you can escape just because you are a small town or you haven't had a police shooting recently. Ultimately, they are geared up for that use of force at any point in time. And you never know when your city could be the next one, even if it's not one where regularly we hear stories of police brutality, because maybe those stories aren't getting told also.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't know, Juan. I don't know if I heard you there trying to jump in or not.
No, yeah, I completely agree. And even like you were saying, the tanks, the guns that they're receiving, is what are they preparing themselves for, right? That's what it feels like. That's the big question is what are they preparing themselves for? We see the growing inequality in the system, and they're arming up for something. And it's in these small towns, they're not arming up to fight ISIS, or maybe they're getting ready for Red Dawn. But at the end of the day, it's to kill everyday working class people. When people have had it, whenever that twig snaps, they're gonna be armed. They're already armed. They're already training. They're doing cross training with Colombia. They're doing cross training with Israel. They're geared up. They're doing these tactical trainings in small towns and in big cities. And at the end of the day, who is it for if it's not for us?
Talking about the worldwide implications of many things.
Rania, you muted.
Oh, Rania's talking, so I can't see you. So if you muted,
you guys, what is my? I really am so bad at technology.
What is?
I gotta stop muting. Well, I had to mute myself because there was noise. Anyways, okay. So now that I'm back, not muted, what I wanted to say is to what Juan's point was. You're saying, what are they preparing for? I think it's really important for people to understand that, I think there's this belief in America because of the way the media portrays it, that police brutality obviously disproportionately impacts Black people. But it's not only, police don't exist just to police Black people in America. You mentioned working class people. There are poor white people who are also brutalized and attacked by police because their communities just aren't rich. Mm-hmm. And so it's you're not safe, is my point. Is it's not like there's people who are completely immune. As inequality grows, the existence of police, right? The existence as the rich get richer. The police exist to protect their property and their wealth from the rest of us. And that, of course, is very racialized, but that doesn't mean that just because you're not Black, you're like safe from this policing apparatus. And it's wrong to believe that. And I think people need to recognize it as not just something that's a threat to only Black communities. It threatens Black communities the most, but it's a threat to all of us who aren't a part of that elite group of people who the police actually work for.
Yeah, people treat, why aren't there protests when a white person gets killed as some sort of great
Protest,
gotcha.
y'all.
But
Protest.
let me know where to be with the pots and pans and the sign. Let's get it, because this is also an injustice. And I think that the global uprising against police brutality that we saw last summer, and that we're really seeing a reinvigoration of right now, was fostered by exacerbated conditions of economic anxiety and social anxiety. And so in Black communities where, we are being brutalized and we're also being subject to these economic conditions that are untenable, it's no wonder that we are rising up for our people, because we just can't take it anymore. Whereas I cannot necessarily say the same for white communities and middle class communities. That may be a reason why we don't see people rising up when other races are brutalized by the police to the degree that we regularly see it happen in communities of color.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I hate to make a hard pivot here, but I will make a hard pivot here.
I do want to.
There is actually another issue I want to.
I do want to mention one thing.
Please go ahead.
When we were in Minnesota, we also saw white families that came out too, that were talking about like they were victims of police brutality. So the thing is that it's not like a thing that doesn't exist. But the narrative needs to be something, right? Like the narrative needs to be like oh, it's only Black communities, because then they could be sold to like people in like white people in the suburbs. It could be sold to folks that already have like racist notions, right? And they could be like, oh, then what were they doing? Why is it this? Why isn't this community? Why don't you protest when somebody is killed in your community by somebody else in your community? Like that is a thing that needs to be packaged and sold. Because if you go on the news, when the people that are killed by the police that are not people of color, it barely gets covered. And also when it does get covered, it's not like it's being covered for our community, but it's being covered for people to be scared. Oh, this is why we need more police. Right? This person that was killed by the police isn't a victim, but is somebody who's big and scary, right? Mike Brown is scary. Trayvon Martin is scary. They find people's records. They find people's pictures with hoodies. They find whatever it is to sell this package to then sell fear. Yeah. So then when more money is being put into policing instead of education, there's no question about it.
Right, that's what it's about. It's about being able to justify that money. And the one way that you do that is to convince people that it's only gonna hurt Black people, but it's really good for you. But actually, it's bad for everyone when all that money is getting diverted to policing. It's the worst for Black people, but like, that's definitely a media narrative that's framed in a very specific way, like what Juan was saying. To justify spending this insane, like over 50% of your budget on police, so that when people call 911 because their family member is having a mental health crisis, the police show up. Like the police show up, or somebody's like having like any kind of medical crisis, the police show up, as opposed to the people. It's amazing to
me that the only time that it's bad to take a picture with a gun is if you've been killed by police. Anytime someone's been killed by police and there's any picture of them anywhere with a gun, it's like, oh, well, they got a picture with a gun. You got this congresswoman from Colorado walking around like she's Annie Oakley out here, and no one seems to care. But somehow, if you have a gun in a photo on Facebook, then you must be an evil person.
If you're Black with a gun on Facebook.
Lo and Bobert.
But Black people aren't allowed to own guns and still be good.
Well, they
people,
aren't.
Apparently.
The first gun control laws. But let's talk about it. In Reconstruction, the Black Panthers. I mean, people don't want to bring that up. But let's be honest. The roots of gun control are to disarm the Black community. That's the roots of it. It's gone beyond that. But I think that's an important understanding of how we have criminalize the ownership of guns in a way that allows racists to own guns. I mean, this whole, listen, there's so much misinformation here. The most people who own guns are not hunters. That's just false, but it's presented that way in the propaganda. The average person who owns a gun is like a middle-class white dad living in the suburbs who's afraid of getting robbed by some black guy, who's got his gun in a shoebox, and then his kid finds it and shoots his other friend in the head.
Why is he afraid,
that's
though?
the average gun owner right there, and it's in the NRA. Their entire politics are based on creating that kind of mentality, but under the guise of it being quote-unquote sportsmen and this, that, and the third.
You actually just reminded me of this. I know you wanted to pivot, but I have to mention this because of what you're talking about. Your ground law got George Zimmerman off for murder on Martin. There was a black man named John McNeil. I covered this back in 2012. He was in Cobb County, Georgia, and he shot and killed a man who was like trying to attack him on his property, like in his yard. And he was a gun owner in Georgia. Lots of people own guns. And he shot the guy, and he was actually charged for murder. And stand your ground didn't work for him because he was a black gun owner. So yeah, even when the law is written to actually benefit the gun owner, and the NRA didn't say a word about his case, by the way. The NRA was like nowhere to be seen. Whereas George Zimmerman literally like hunted down a black child and shot him, and fought him and shot him. He attacked him and shot him, and of course got away with it for reasons we're all well aware of.
I mean, the same thing happened to Marissa Alexander.
Yep.
In Florida, I believe, right?
Yeah.
And she didn't even shoot anybody. Like she shot at the ceiling because
That's right.
her like abusive partner was like threatening to attack her, and she went to jail. Like these laws
was only released because of a massive outcry. And worth noting that this guy told the newspaper that he was abusing her. He told the local newspaper, he said, "I'll never forget this. I got 5 baby mamas and I put hands on all of them." And she was in jail. And that was his quote to the newspaper about his activity. Well,
America.
if it's all right with you, please go ahead.
No.
America.
Yeah. Damn. Yeah.
Yeah. What else can you say at that one? Unbelievable. It was the St. Petersburg Times, I think. So to make a hard pivot, I don't know if it is a hard pivot at this point, since I've said I was going to do it 8 times. But something that I think has also been majorly in the news, rightfully so this week, is the issue of vaccines, the vaccine waiver at the World Trade Organization, the U.S. changing its position, and really just how all of that is couched in many ways, but certainly in the context of the new Cold War. Something that your retweet made me aware of, Mariah, was a tweet by Jamal Bowman. I can't see this. Maybe we're bringing it up. Maybe we're not. But this tweet by Jamal Bowman, where he was sort of pushing back on this idea of like everything being centered around competition against China, as opposed to like saving the world with vaccines. And I mean, it was so. I mean, both in Biden's speech, in front of Congress, and the way the vaccines are portrayed. I mean, it's almost like, Mariah, if you want to promote something positive in America, you have to do it in a way that it's like, but China is bad, and this is why we must do it.
So it's up right now.
Yeah. So it's like y'all want to show like y'all better than communism, like then like provide for the people globally. Provide for everyone. Like, it's so simple. And I really am concerned about how, particularly some of Biden's rhetoric around competing with China to be the winners of the 21st century, I think he said in his recent address, like is stoking a lot of the anti-Asian, or has the potential to stoke a lot of the anti-Asian violence that we were just bore the brunt of here in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago, the loss of 8 folks in the rash of spa shootings. And so this idea that we have to dominate China, we have to show them who's boss. We can't be weak in front of them. Like, what do you think? What do you think the white supremacists are going to do with that?
Right.
Bruh. Like, and so it comes back to the fact that both sides are very, very much culpable for stoking the hatred that then is being taken out on people who live here. Not even to mention the impacts with our imperial presence abroad. But yeah, y'all want to show China who's boss? Let's get vaccines to every person. period. Like, I don't know what, like, if y'all really want to play that game, let's play.
I think it's interesting. China really has started to play the kind of role that the Soviet Union once played for the US, which is everything good or bad that is being put forth as a policy at this moment, including good policies like infrastructure plans, the vaccinations, is being framed as this is how we get China, you guys. Like, I'm like waiting for the moment when we start hearing that we need to give universal health care a chance because China.
Yeah,
like that's where we're at. Like every policy, whether it's we need to raise the Pentagon budget or we need, we need the state to cover preschool costs, is like because China.
Yeah, I mean,
China's
become like Cobra Commander in G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
But it kind of plays like in a way, you've got this growing inequality. I, of course, don't think we're in like a New Deal era kind of moment. I don't see Democrats actually going that far. But it's almost like it shows you the value that there is in some sort of multipolar world, in that if the U.S. does feel like it needs to throw some like more crumbs at its population, then it kind of like lessens the austerity a little bit in an effort to compete with a rising China or a rising whatever, and it used to be the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had all these benefits and welfare policies, and you had to compete with that. And in order to do that, like you had to throw bigger crumbs at people or there'd be like some sort of workers uprising.
Yeah, I think it's, it's an important point on so many levels, really. I mean, it just feels to me that it was also important to see a congressperson say something about it. Whatever I think about any one person in Congress, I'm pretty sure Jamal Bowman is actually the first person I've seen in Congress, literally the first person I've seen in Congress in the past year that has in any way, shape, or form questioned whether or not we should be moving into this new Cold War mentality. And that to me is also very scary. And, this was similar to the first Cold War, like you have this lockstep conversation here where even people who may know it's not right, they don't necessarily want to say anything because then it's sort of like, well, what are you trying to say? What are you doing? Are you a traitor? Are you this? Are you that? And sort of the official enemy politics, Mariah, is such a huge history, certainly such a huge history of black radicals being smeared, that it just felt to me like, okay, finally, thankfully, somebody in Congress was willing to say something about this, because I'm sure there's so many people who are questioning it, but feel, well, if I say it, what are people going to think about me?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and then my wondering is like, does the left like accept that framing of competition with other global powers as a way for us to expand the social safety net here? Like we were joking about like, oh, universal pre-K so we can catch up with China, but like, is that an acceptable trade-off of like rhetoric for actual like material gains for working people? I don't know. I feel like it feels a little gross, but like.
Oh, of course. No, it's awful. It promotes war, and or at least it both justifies this new policy while also justifying raising the Pentagon budget. So it actually contradicts itself.
You could cancel my rent. If it's for China, you cancel
He's like,
cancel my rent.
Cancel my student debt.
School free for China, healthcare, China.
The student debt, student debt, all of it.
But that's not
all debt.
That's not what's happening. Like that's not what's happening. It's not a trade-off. No. It's not a trade-off. We're getting nothing. We're getting racism. We're getting like more money put into military budgets. We're getting more policing. The only reason people are talking about the struggle of working class people right now is because of COVID. It's not because of the real inequality of the system. It's because there was a year where the flaws of capitalism have been exposed to a greater extent, and now they have to do something about it. If it wasn't for that, then Biden's speech would have only been about China. It would have only been about the competition with China. And it's because people are suffering to a greater extent right now that any of these things are happening. And I that can be like loose, right? Because we don't live in that alternate timeline where COVID didn't happen. But how long has Biden been in politics? 40 something years? When has he introduced any of the progressive policies that he's now toting?
Yeah.
Well, he's done the opposite. He's actually done the exact opposite of introduced those progressive policies. He's tried to take down the only decent policies we've had. He's talked about defunding Social Security. He freaking says he wrote the crime bill. He's like, I wrote the damn bill, like, and he's proud of it, right? Like, yeah, I wrote the bill. I wrote the damn bill.
Mentioning COVID, this is a real hard pivot, but I don't want to go off air without just ripping these people. I don't know if you all have seen this, but Kroger is closing stores all across America in cities that are passing these ordinances to raise the minimum wage, for essential workers. Like Long Beach was the first one. I think maybe it was a bonus or something. They called it hero pay. I think LA is another one. And they just start closing grocery stores, profitable grocery stores, because they refuse to pay people. And it's just like all of the rhetoric about essential workers and we're going to clap for people and we love them and so on and so forth. Then localities say, yes, we do appreciate these people. We appreciate them so much, we're going to change the laws to increase their wages, to show them appreciation. And then the companies that employ them are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Increase their wages. Well, we're not going to do that. We're just going to close the store. It's unbelievable. Long Beach in LA, I think it's 2 to 3 stores. It's the most callous thing I think I've seen in the past 3 months.
It's crazy.
Yeah. That's how little Americans.
It is.
Sorry, Mariah, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, I was going to say, so that's what's known as the Capitol strike. Am I correct? Like when Capitol was like, nah, we out. Ha! Yeah. So like, how do we fight back against that? Like, what are you supposed to do in that situation when because I represent a food desert. Like I'm imagining like how the community come together and organize against a Capitol strike of that nature. Like it's really insidious that they have that power. Like, oh, you need diapers? Well, we had to pay our workers $2 extra an hour, and now we close. So you're welcome. Like it's just really insane to me. It's really insane to me, and something I think that as we win gains for working people around issue of wages, something that we're gonna have to be prepared to organize against.
Yeah, I agree with you, and insidious is the word. I mean, it just what was the meeting? I mean, you just think like there was no one in the meeting. And the Kroger corporate headquarters, like, I don't know, y'all, like, this just doesn't look good. I mean, who is working there? I mean, we know what they're working there. We know it's the profit motive. We know it's the nature of capitalism. But it just seems like it's hard to really fathom that a group of people really got around and were like, okay, you know what we need to do? We need to fire hundreds of essential workers because we won't pay them $4 more. I mean... We could
just
go on
to
and
ensure
on.
Our corporate overlords still get billions.
If only they knew that if they would just pay their workers those $4 more, we could win against China.
Tell them that.
None of y'all called the CEO and told them?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I want to go back to something though. You said, is Jamal Bowman really the only member of the squad that's like openly spoken against escalation of this new Cold War?
I believe he's the only member of Congress. I mean, I could be wrong, but I follow Congress pretty closely. I don't think I've seen, I could be wrong. Now, if you count the primary, the Democratic primary, Bernie Sanders, who's in the Senate, said something tepidly about that a couple times. And I think 1 or 2 other people, they made some paean to cooperation. So if you count them, but in terms of people who are just in Congress, I mean, I'm really racking my brain. I cannot remember one other congressperson that has said anything of this nature. Now, I could be wrong, but I actually don't think I am wrong. I think that really he stands alone.
So what is the point of like electing these people to Congress? These progressive Democrats to Congress, if they don't actually do anything about the biggest problem that we have at the moment, which is an escalation with China. It's like threatens the world to have an escalation with China. Like, what is the point? I don't understand.
I feel like the average voter just isn't that informed about foreign policy issues. Yeah. That we are escalating a Cold War with China is not something that
but the squad members should. The squad members should be
certainly. Yeah.
Like this is what's justifying
raising there without having to address that because people are thinking about bread and butter kitchen table shit.
Yeah. I mean, I want to go back to
Keep going back. We're going back.
We're gonna keep on going back.
Way
Go
back.
Keep on going back.
No, but the conversation about food deserts and like even like these like corporations striking, I think a big part of that is that we got to realize that we can't be dependent on corporations to feed us, right? Like we can't be dependent on even like this capitalist system to feed us. That's why like the organizations like Cooperation Jackson, like the work that they do with like in food deserts, right? The black farmers in Detroit, the black urban farmers in Detroit that are creating like a food social network, like that is the work that is necessary. And it's crazy that we have an entire system that throws out a crazy amount of food on a regular basis. During the pandemic, we saw food being thrown out, like dairy farmers literally pouring tanks down into the soil, right? And that's food that can be given to like poor and working class people that were suffering during this time, right? The pantry lines were around the block, and still are today, right? But the thing is that the organization is in the hands of the capitalists. The system isn't organized, right? Like the only people that are organized are Amazon, FedEx, UPS. But instead of having organization of how we can get these food surplus that exists, again, before the COVID pandemic, there was food being thrown out then. What is it? Something like 50% or 60% of food gets thrown out either when you calculate the food that doesn't make it to the actual grocery store and the food that actually gets thrown out, right? Like, the majority of food gets thrown out, but there's people that are hungry. It's the same thing with housing, the housing issue. There's in New York, these high rises are empty, and they were empty before the pandemic. There's high rises in Midtown with 85% vacancy, 65% vacancy. Meanwhile, you step out where we're filming right now, and there's homeless people up and down the block. And they've been homeless for how long? The pandemic didn't make them homeless. Mm-hmm. And the crisis of capitalism is capitalism itself.
Period.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I'm not even going to get into foreign policy now, but I certainly appreciate what you're saying there, Juan. That'll be another story for another time. Mariah Parker, always enlightening to have you here with us on the Freedom Side. Very honored to be able to get a little bit of your time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here as always. I'll have a good night.
Peace. Pleasure is all ours for sure. We're going to keep moving forward here. We're going to return our attention to Colombia, the country of Colombia, where there is a mass uprising taking place. We are very happy to be joined here by the journalist Zoe Alexandra, who is the co-editor of People's Dispatch, covering social movements and left politics in Latin America and the Caribbean. Zoe, thanks for being back with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, the pleasure is all ours. Ongoing situation here in Colombia. I don't know how many days it's been going on, but really the country just being totally rocked by social explosions, really, that started with this tax law. I mean, maybe, and we have some clips and some other things we're going to show, but just for those who maybe know nothing, Zoe, can you give us sort of the capsule view of where we are right now?
Yeah, so starting on April 28th, people across the country, across Colombia, we're talking cities, small towns, over 600 municipalities of the 1,100 municipalities in Colombia had strike actions beginning on April 28th against the tax reform law. This tax reform law essentially would have seen an increase in the VAT tax on items of basic consumption. So we're talking food, public services, all sorts of things. So really hitting the middle class hard. And this tax reform bill was, really cynically called the Solidarity Bill. And it was attempting to kind of close the fiscal deficit and basically make the Colombian working class pay for kind of the, deficit in the budget that the government has. And basically what we've seen happen over the last week is that beginning on April 28th, massive mobilizations have been carried out. As I mentioned, cities, towns, you name it. People are on the streets, in the plazas, demanding that this bill be withdrawn. And beyond that, they're also demanding an end to the violence against communities, an end to the genocide that's been going on in Colombia for, of course, decades. But specifically about since the Havana peace agreements were signed. And so we see massive protests begin, they continue, and the police, as they often do in Colombia, responded with, just, I don't want to say unprecedented levels of repression, because this is actually what happens every single time there are protests in Colombia. They responded with tear gas, they responded with baton attacks, they responded by, militarizing the cities, deploying police across the cities. After a couple of nights of disturbances, of protests, the President Duque ordered the army to go patrol the streets. And of course, in a country like Colombia, you can do this because they have one of the biggest armies in Latin America. They have, funding from the United States, training from the United States. There are bases all across the country because, they've been in an internal armed conflict for 60 years. And so essentially what we've seen is that over the past week, people are on the streets protesting the tax reform bill. And then, the police brutality has just brought more and more people onto the streets. The results of this is 37 people killed in 1 week of protests, 26 people with eye-related injuries, 11 people with cases of sexual assault, over 900 people arbitrarily detained. I mean, the numbers are astounding. They're not surprising because this is Colombia, and this is unfortunately what happens when the people revolt against this regime.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate that summary. And I want to juxtapose it a little bit with some clips because, not to make a huge deal about sort of peaceful protests, but when you see the repression, it really hits you even harder when it's just contrasted with the spirit of resistance, but the spirit of positivity in these protests. So the first one I want to show is just a couple clips of some of the cultural happenings at two of the large gatherings that we put together here, just to give you a sense of not only the crowds, but sort of the feeling in the air. So let's show that first, and then I want to get to this repression. So you can see very festive atmosphere, people obviously coming out to fight for the things that they want. But, I just want people to keep that in their minds, those scenes. And then here we want to play a collection of a number of videos here that represent just the tip of the iceberg of the type of repression that we are seeing ongoing in Colombia.
Yo los abandono. Llame a la policía.
I think that juxtaposition really says it all. As you said, Zoe, I mean, it's not at all unprecedented in the history of Colombia, and certainly neither is resistance, massive resistance from the people. But, is this indicative in your mind of, I don't know, I hate to even make people make predictions like this, but some sort of turning point, some sort of something against this narco oligarchy that has been so terrible for the country?
Definitely. I mean, I think what we're seeing is the fall of Uribismo. And for those of you who don't know, Álvaro Uribe was the president of Colombia from 2002 to 2010. He ruled over Colombia during one of the most bloody periods in Colombian history. Under his rule, 20,000 people were disappeared. The false positive scandal took place wherein 6,400 people were killed and dressed up as guerrilla army combatants. I mean, he is really the definition of genocide. He is a war criminal. Of course, he was just in an event in NYU 2 days ago. Just want to highlight that. Yesterday, sorry. And, he has had this command over Colombian politics. He was reelected in 2016 as a senator. Ivan Duque, the current, 2018 as a senator. And Ivan Duque, the current president, kind of is a protege of Alvaro Uribe. He's from the same party. Duque has almost no political background. He was really just groomed to continue the legacy of Alvaro Uribe. And what we're seeing is that the people are no longer supporting this. They're no longer, falling for this lie. What Alvaro Uribe really relied on was, stoking fear in the people, saying that I am the only one who's going to protect you from the guerrillas. I am the only one who's going to protect you and ensure your safety. And now they're seeing that is, completely untrue. He represents, attacking the people, not only, through violent repression, annihilation of social movements, but also, he was the architect of neoliberalism in Colombia. He was famously, passed the health reform bill, which, has taken away healthcare for millions of people in Colombia. And today, Duque is, representing a continuation of that. He's, consolidating the neoliberal model and consolidating this project of death and destruction in the territories.
Yeah, I think people, you know this well, Zoe, you've lived in Colombia, you've covered it for years. I'm glad you brought up the issue of just the neoliberal reality. I almost feel, and this is obviously because of the US propaganda here, that it's undersold the level of underdevelopment that exists for the vast majority of people in Colombia. I remember when there was the bridge controversy, the Venezuela, bridge aid nonsense, right across the border from or close to. And at the same time, there had been this flood that had happened recently of these teachers trying to get to work in some mud path that had been wiped away. And it was just unbelievable to me that here's Ivan Duque at this dumb concert talking about we need to raise tens of millions of dollars of aid for this other country, which was of course bogus, where 10 minutes away from where he is, there's no roads, there's no help for people, the schools have been blown down by this storm. It really is stark, the actual situation on the ground, as opposed to what it's presented in America, which is the great country of Latin America.
Yeah, Colombia is actually the most unequal country in Latin America and the Caribbean. It has the largest gap of regional development in the country. So I think that's really important to highlight. A lot of the regions are, people don't have roads, they don't have hospitals, they don't have schools. So this is a reality. And of course, 60 years of armed conflict, 60 years of investing in war over the livelihoods of the people, over the safety of the people, is going to give you this outcome. That's why there's 4 million Colombians who are refugees in Venezuela, who go there to get education, who go there to get healthcare. You know what I mean? Colombia has the largest internally displaced population. There's communities of Colombians across the world. Why is that? Because there's, gross underdevelopment and an army against the people, war against the people.
I'm sure any day now, Samantha Power, who was just this week sworn in as the new head of USAID, will be speaking out very loudly of all the injustices that you just mentioned. That's the crazy part. It's not so crazy, but everything you just described is projected onto Venezuela. All we ever hear is that Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, Cuba are all very, very bad because they build schools and hospitals and nationalize their resources. But then Colombia is America's greatest ally in the region. And I actually remember a few years back, I think it was the last president of Colombia before Ivan Duque, actually bragged that Colombia is the Israel of Latin America. He said it in a proud way. And he's right. He's right, though, right? He's absolutely right. Colombia is the Israel of Latin America in so many ways. But I wonder, Zoe, can you talk a little bit about the fact that, this is not to take away from the violence towards protests, but recent state violence in Colombia was already quite bad. Last year alone, there was over 200 social activists that were murdered in Colombia by various paramilitary groups that are believed to be connected to the state. And there are actually people leaving Colombia. You mentioned internally displaced refugees in Latin America. there was a spike last year in the number of Colombians leaving to go to Spain because they were just leaving this poverty that you describe and this violence that you describe. But can you talk a little bit about the murder of social activists?
Definitely. I mean, this is, I think, a really key issue and directly related to what's happening right now on the streets. The reason that the armed forces, the reason why the police can assassinate with such impunity is because it's been doing so for the past couple of decades. And what we've seen in the last 4 years since the Havana peace agreements were signed in 2016 is that instead of actually, pacifying the country, we've seen kind of the target being shifted. Now, the state and paramilitary forces are focused on social leaders, human rights defenders, and all of those people who trusted in the peace process, who signed the peace agreements, and who demobilized. And so actually since 2016, I mean, the estimates vary, but it's anywhere between 1,100 and 1,600 social leaders, human rights defenders, and demobilized combatants have been assassinated. And, within some of these cases, it's the National Army, it's the police. And of course, I think if you speak to communities that have been occupied by paramilitary groups, what they'll tell you is that oftentimes the paramilitaries are just members of the army with the patch covered up. So, I mean, really, it's an extension of the state. It is carrying out state policy, and it's going on without any consequences. And this is why they're able to do what they're doing today, because they've been doing it. And the U.S. has not said one word. The international community, whatever that means, has not withdrawn military aid. That's what people are demanding. It's like, we're not asking for anything else than stop giving tanks, stop giving Black Hawk helicopters that are going to fly over the neighborhoods of the poor. You know what I mean? These are basic things that the U.S. can stop right now and have a direct impact on the lives of the people and the organized people in Colombia.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because it raises one other question, and that is, is anything being done for the former fighters? I mean, I know that the peace process was supposed to have all of these different elements, and the State Department, in fact, as you know well, released that statement last month about how great things seem to be going. I don't know why they would do that, but I think it's important to sort of counterpose that because there is at least this belief that there would be some sort of mechanism through the peace process to try to address some of this.
Yeah, I think it's a really tough situation because, of course, the peace agreements were signed under Governor Juan Manuel Santos, who, again, was defense minister under Uribe, but of course took kind of a different approach to the situation. Uribe's position is annihilate anything that is in opposition. Juan Manuel Santos said, you know what, let's pacify the territories, let's see what happens. And so these agreements were signed, under his government. And once Duque comes to office, he just starts undermining every single commitment that the government has made to the peace agreements. So this means, the peace agreements involve a series of different policies, of measures. It involves, creating productive projects so demobilized fighters can, be producing chocolate and, have a job and a livelihood because they've been in the war for decades. It involves creating mechanisms to be able to judge the crimes that were committed during the conflict. One of, Duque's infamous actions was to try to undermine the special jurisdiction for peace and to say that it didn't have, validity. And this is the same tribunal that's going to be looking at the crimes committed by the army during the conflict. And so every single aspect of these peace agreements has been underfunded, undermined, and meanwhile, the people who are in these transitional zones to transition to civilian life are being picked off and assassinated. And so, how can you have peace in this kind of situation? And what does peace even really mean if they're just attacking all the agreements that were just made?
Yeah. Well, how does this affect, in your mind, the politics of Colombia? I saw that Gustavo Petro, a former progressive candidate for president, high in the polls again. And you said at the beginning that this may be the fall of some of these politics birthed by Uribe. Your thoughts on some of the, repercussions?
Yeah, I mean, in the 2018 elections, we saw the massive rise of Gustavo Petro. I mean, just to want to tell people, Gustavo Petro was mayor of Bogota. He was also a member of the M19, which was an urban guerrilla group. And so the fact that someone who was part of this kind of group could make it to the presidential elections in and run off against an Uribista is already historic. And this time around, he is polling really high. And, there's a whole coalition of left forces that has been built around him, the, historic pact for unity. I think we'll see how this turns out in the polls. I mean, electoral politics is always really complicated, especially in Colombia, a long history of abstentionism. But I think either way, people are becoming more organized, becoming more mobilized, and a lot of maybe the sectors that would be supporting the conservatives, are on the streets now because they're seeing their economic and survival kind of be impacted by the neoliberal policies. They're the ones who are also being impacted by the repression now. And I think there will be a shift towards more leftist policies that have been so stigmatizing Colombia.
Mm-hmm.
Zoe, I'm curious, just like making this a little bit more regional for a moment. There is this issue on the border between Colombia and Venezuela. You have these paramilitary style groups that have taken over certain towns. The Venezuelan military has launched a campaign against these groups, and you've seen the mainstream Western media has covered it in a very anti-Venezuela regime change kind of way. The Venezuelan military is so evil. Look at what they're doing to these people on the border. But what is happening on the border? Is this sponsored by the Colombian state? Is there a connection to the Colombian state? And, by extension, the U.S.? Is this some kind of what it looks to me like? And, it looks to me like there's something very dirty taking place that isn't just, lawless areas, that has to do with trying to destabilize Venezuela further. What's your take on what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think the existence of all of these paramilitary groups in Colombia who daily terrorize the Colombian population, who, are involved in drug trafficking and have just made that kind of the only existence for people in those regions. The border regions are some of the most impacted by the armed conflict, with most numbers of, displaced people who have to rely on, coca production to survive. I mean, one could say that the fact that these groups are allowed to exist and to profit and, have alliances with maybe local government authorities is, of course, because the Colombian state allows for it and because, they benefit from this drug trade. I mean, there's a lot to say about the links between the national government and, other elected officials with these kind of groups. Mm-hmm. And of course, I mean, Colombia is the U.S.'s biggest ally in its assault against Venezuela. I mean, that's another reason why they can't lose Colombia. That's why we're not seeing such strong statements coming out. If Iván Duque goes down, if there's some sort of leftist government in Colombia, what's that going to mean for the attack against Venezuela? So I think really, I don't know if we want to say that this is a plot that's the U.S. is behind, of course the reason these groups exist and the reason they're allowed to exist and thrive really is because Colombian government policies, is because the U.S. has, systematically trained the army, has, forced these zones to be zones of economic abandonment. In the region Arauca, which is in that border region, right where next to Apure, where this, military confrontation is happening, is one where Occidental Petroleum, a U.S. oil company, has occupied one of the largest indigenous kind of like sacred holy sites where there's this incredible ecosystem. And this U.S. company has occupied the entire area. This community is not allowed to enter. And, countless people have been assassinated by paramilitary groups, assassinated by private security, by members of the army for resisting the fact that this U.S. company has essentially, occupied their land. So, I mean, it's all necessary to add in this context, in that the war is against the people. And that's I think the bottom line here.
I mean, the irony, of course, is that the vast majority of this U.S. military aid that goes to the Colombian police and military is for counter narcotics. Yet somehow, as you explain, a lot of this is revolving around drug trafficking. So it shows you how effective, or actually effective, the American drug war is. Wherever the Americans go, the drugs seem to flow even more. I did not mean for that to rhyme. That was very corny.
The number of the level of cocaine exported from Colombia has actually increased since counter-narcotic policies have been implemented in the region, and it continues to grow every year. So,
yeah,
make of that what you will.
Juan, I didn't know if you wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's like a perfect time to pivot to me.
That's what I do. Make things happen perfectly.
I think the hypocrisy is showing itself, right? Like, who in the U.S. government has really said anything? These mainstream media outlets, like I checked last night, New York Times, and the one article I saw about Colombia was like in other news, all the way at the bottom, after the ads, after the paid by. The same thing with like Univision just started talking about this like yesterday. Like, where's Jorge Ramos at? Where is Jorge Ramos at?
Looking for somebody eating out of the trash in Venezuela, I guess.
He started posting about this yesterday. Right. And he posted something is like, the police and the military exist to protect the people, not to attack them. But what does that mean? Like, that's not even a criticism. That could be taken as anything. That could be like, oh, y'all don't even know what's happening, or like it's milk toast, right? But last month he was posting about Venezuela, right? Like, where's the critique of?
Isn't Jorge? Isn't he the one who like got even more famous than he already was by asking Maduro why he's a dictator? Or something?
Yeah. Jorge Ramos.
Tried to have that weird moment. They got kicked him out of the presidential palace, and he was trying to claim it was because he was like about to uncover something.
No, it's because you're a cartoon character, Jorge.
Well, Marco Rubio today said that international Marxist allies and narco guerrilla groups were actually behind the protests in Colombia. And so if that doesn't highlight kind of the undying, need to attack Venezuela and attack anything that's left in spite of 37 people being assassinated, I think nothing else really does.
It's the same thing that happened. It's the same thing that happened with Khashoggi. I don't know how to say his name. In Saudi Arabia, there was very little critiques on Saudi Arabia. The stuff that's happening in Israel right now, where like these huge marches and what were said, like these huge like marches where they're saying like kill Arabs. Marches, yeah. What was said? Yeah. Oh, there's what Trump said. There's good and bad people on both sides. That's what they said about this too. Right? There's good and bad people on both sides. Yeah, the police are attacking protesters, but they shouldn't be that violent. It's the same thing that they were saying during the uprising, right? The critiques only exist when when it's against a country that's in opposition of the United States, right? When it's in political opposition, when it's ideological opposition, where it's a country that's not allowing the resources to be pillaged, or is not allowing the U.S. to use them as a satellite for their military.
Yeah, I mean, there's really nothing else I could add to that. I mean, the level of ridiculousness, maybe just the fact that it's so out there in the open is in and of itself, one of the critical pieces. And yeah, I mean, the regionalization of it all and is an important piece of it. And I think it also speaks to our struggle here in the United States and how closely connected it is. I mean, there was that Trump ad from last year in the election that was comparing Biden to Maduro, Gustavo Petro, and somebody else, Daniel Ortega. I don't even know. Hugo Chavez was in there. Yeah. But, this whole idea of Castro Chavismo, when I was in Mexico in 2018 for the election, all over the subway, in the subway in Mexico City, fantastic subway, by the way, amazing stations, truly one of the great architectural wonders of the world. But the ads everywhere, Naya, who is this right-wing candidate, had taken out were... Even just thinking about it is so ridiculous. So there is a Venezuelan flag, and underneath it said, "You know who." And then there was a Mexican flag, and underneath it said, "Anaya." And everything about it. I mean, it's just nothing to do with anything in Mexico. Nothing to do with what he was going to do for Mexicans. But he was definitely going to make sure everyone riding the subway know that he was not connected to the Chavista movement in Venezuela. But what's important about that is he lost historically in that election. So maybe there's something to be said for that. Well, Zoe, quickly before we let you go here, I just, looking forward, should people be expecting ongoing protests? I mean, what is I know the tax law now has been, withdrawn, but where are we moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, organized movements have vowed to stay on the streets. As I mentioned before, this is about a lot more than just a tax reform bill. It's about resisting a genocidal state. It's about calling for an end to the, constant murder of the people. And it's about trying to get the Colombian state to take responsibility for guaranteeing basic rights for its people. I mean, again, I said this neoliberal model has been already consolidated in Colombia. It's the country where, access to higher education is almost impossible. Access to quality healthcare is not a reality for people. And this is a country that has, massive amounts of natural resources, a huge oil and gas deposits, huge amount of gold, silver. They have the resources. And so I think that's why we're going to see a continuation of this strike. This is spreading, of course, to rural regions who are already, supporting the strike, but they're, as is very classic and typical in Colombian movements, they carry out road blockades of major points of highways. And this is going to be continuing. I think, thankfully, we're seeing a slight decrease in the, massacres that are happening during the night. People are trying to make sure that, the young people are off the streets once it gets dark, because that's obviously when security forces take advantage to kill people. But, people should really stay tuned. I think we can't even think of this strike as just an isolated strike. It's a continuation of constant mobilization by people in Colombia. I mean, since Iván Duque has taken office, there's been massive mobilizations every couple months. I mean, there was a student strike in September to November 2018, a national strike in April, the social minga in March. In November 2019, we saw a 2-month-long strike against neoliberal policies. This past September 2020, that's when there were massive strikes against police brutality. And so this is going to continue. The people are extremely organized, extremely mobilized, and are very clear about their demands. And it's just about continuing to amplify the struggle and continuing to understand what are all the elements that are behind the situation now. It's not just about one bill. It's about 60 years of waging war on the people. And it's about 60 years of being a colony of the United States, being the country with the most amount of military bases. And a people who want sovereignty, a people who want full independence and want to live with dignity.
Well, Zoe, we thank you for all of your time, and certainly anyone who wants to keep following this issue and many more should be checking People's Dispatch on a regular basis. I assume you'll also be talking about this tomorrow morning, Zoe, on the excellent People's Dispatch show, of which you are a co-host. Give the people what they want. Was that 11 a.m. Eastern time, 11:30?
11 a.m. Eastern, 8:30 Indian Standard Time.
Fantastic. People's Dispatch Facebook page. Great show. But thanks again, Zoe, for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, sticking with Latin America real quick, Juan, I do want to go back to you. Obviously, we are very lucky here at Breakthrough News to have a good relationship with the People's Forum here in New York City, also the home of the great new bookstore, 1804 Books. Check that out. But an important new campaign that we learned about from the folks here at the People's Forum, relevant to Latin America, in particular the country of Cuba, and also the fight against COVID-19. You're muted now.
Silly.
Look at that. See?
Silly. Sorry.
Ha!
I know you were gonna say
The
ha.
irony.
I thought you were
the
going to boo
irony.
him, Rania.
Yeah, no, you should have booed me.
No, I'm taking
Boo me.
I'm taking pleasure in the fact that Juan came at me when I was muted. And
I
so now
felt
I'm
it.
coming for you,
Why are you
Juan.
booing me? I'm
Yeah.
right.
Nah, yeah, I felt. But like Eugene said, we're currently in the People's Forum, and they've partnered up with Code Pink to help raise funding. Right now there's a worldwide shortage on syringes. The price has gone up tenfold in the last months, and the U.S. blockade of Cuba has made it even more difficult for Cuba to access syringes. Despite all these challenges, Cuba has produced 5 vaccines that will soon be used as a mass vaccination project for their people. So yeah, currently, if you text Cuba Solidarity, I'll put it up right now. If you text Cuba Solidarity to 44321, you can get a link how you can support. Monetary support is needed right now. $50 can help buy 1,500 syringes for 500 Cubans. $100 can buy 3,000 syringes. 500 can buy 15,000 syringes for 5,000 Cubans. So text 44321 to Cuba Solidarity so you can help out. And I'll put up a graphic really for a little bit so folks can see it as well. Let me put that up.
Yeah, no, super important. Cuba is going to produce 100 million vaccines this year. Now, Cuba is a country of 11 million people, going to produce 100 million vaccines, and is also going to be doing technology transfers with other countries. They've already actually done some of them. Iran is one of them, a country that was very hard hit by COVID-19, but really, many, many countries around the world, a country of 11 million people, willing to make 100 million vaccines for the world to address this COVID-19 pandemic. So I would say that this is not only critical solidarity, but it's not just solidarity with the Cuban people in the abstract, but solidarity with people who have given almost everything they had and stretched their resources to the limit to help dozens of countries, and now to really put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, on this issue of vaccines. Unlike Canada, that has the same number, it has 5 times the number of vaccines that they do people. The United States, 3 times the number of vaccines that they do people, and they're refusing to help anyone. So I hope people please support this campaign to any degree possible, the maximum degree possible, because it's critical, not just for Cuba, but for worldwide public health.
Yeah. All the donations, all contributions will be sent to Global Health. And our tax deductible, if that's what you want, like this, we make this show for like people that are in the midst of struggle. We make this show for working class people. We make this show for like the international public, and it's not just enough to watch us, but really like be in the streets, but also support these projects that are constantly being fought at by the United States. So again, if you text Cuba Solidarity to 44321, you get the link and all the other information. Please help if you can. We need to stand with with Cuba and the Cuban people.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to keep the show moving forward here, and we are very happy to be joined as we continue the show by Lillian House, an organizer, member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, second time here on the freedom side, and I have to say, Lillian, we are honored to have you back with us.
You're muted.
Oh no, you're muted. She pulled a Rania.
She pulled the wand, I guess.
I guess she pulled the wand.
We're not going to boo Lillian, that's okay, but I will
can't boo our guest.
boo you, Rania, and Juan.
No. You're still muted.
Silently, at least.
You might have to refresh. Lillian. If you plugged in your headphones.
But you look great.
Yeah, you do look great. I don't think she can hear us.
The perils of technology, I have to say. It's
we
all so advanced.
There, we can hear you now. We can hear you.
The mute button was off, so I don't know.
Well, there might be someone doesn't want this conversation to happen.
You.
The feds.
You said it, not me. Lillian, seriously, thanks for being with us. Last time we talked to you here on the Freedom Side, you were one of a number of activists there in Denver. You and several others facing as much as 50 years, I think it might have even been 60 years in prison, simply for the crime of protesting. There's a documentary, certainly, Defending Justice in Denver, that you can see if you go to youtube.com/breakthroughnews. Shout out to Will Whiteman, our creative director, who was the driving force behind that. Will, were you just cheering yourself?
Show your face. Yeah,
I do. We heard a woo. We heard a woo. There he is.
Well, we will cheer for you.
Unashamed.
You don't have to cheer yourself.
Unashamed.
Lillian, where are we now in this case?
Well, today we had all of the felony charges are finally dropped. We just have a handful of misdemeanors left, but we were charged in 2 counties with really, really serious charges. One of the DAs had previously dropped all of the felonies, and
just about all of the misdemeanors, and now the other district attorney has backed off of all of the charges. He dropped all of them today. So yeah, this is a huge step forward towards, full justice, which we still want to see. But this attack, not just against us, but certainly against our community's right to stand up, it is not succeeding.
I mean, it feels so momentous. I think for all of us who saw the charges originally, they were so absurd. Just kidnapping, just terrible, terrible things. And there was no evidence at all. Obviously, them dropping the charges is a sign of this. Give me your evaluation, Lillian. It seems as if they put these charges on you all to try to destroy a powerful movement that you were in the leadership of. Now, does this almost backfire on them? Not only does it expose them, but it feels that it shows that if you are willing to stand up and not fold, you can succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this was initiated as an attempt to really terrorize this community, which for the first time had stood up together and said, we're not going to tolerate the abuse of the Aurora Police Department and their continued impunity. And, in reality, there's a lot of forces that came together to make this case happen. There's multiple police departments, sheriff's departments, district attorneys, police chiefs, city officials, and, a lot of people who certainly were involved in misconduct around Elijah McClain's case, who were not pleased that this protest movement was really bringing all that to light. And I think that, they really came at us with everything that they had. I don't know if they thought we were going to plea. I don't know if they thought that they could get some of these charges through. But they are not succeeding. And that is really a testament to the strength of a movement that shows, real resolve, that shows unity, and that, understands that even if we are attacked for standing up, that, that's just the nature of working for change against forces that are this out of control and dangerous.
Well, and it seems that on multiple levels, it's just a complete and total shredding of the credibility of Aurora PD. If I remember this correctly, the police chief or someone in that guise had been going around to the media trying to smear you all. It seems as if, that now looks as fraudulent as it was in the first place.
Well, yeah. The police chief here has been, she's been trying to present herself as someone who is really a reformer, but has only, really made these emotional shows and some superficial policy changes, but has been completely unwilling to address the need for justice in Elijah McClain's case. And, I think that she's certainly one of the forces who motivated this case to begin. And, when it started dissolving, really the first sign of this was when we actually went to court and the prosecution was forced to show evidence that they had even just probable cause to take us to trial on the kidnapping charge. They couldn't do that. The judge ruled that there wasn't any evidence that we had committed this crime of, not even that we had committed it, but there wasn't even enough evidence to take us to trial on kidnapping. But he also said we hadn't committed a single act of violence. We hadn't committed a single act of destruction. This was a peaceful protest. All of this from this judge. He wouldn't have signed the warrant for our arrests. And, there you have your case, being, held to the test of, the court, and the chief didn't get what she wanted. And yes, she started going around to, right-wing local talk shows, stirring up those audiences, going to local media. It's really disturbing. Just tapping into the media, which has all along been very, very willing to just parrot her narrative. And even when it's, just factually proven in court to be baseless.
One thing that I think is important to me about it as well is, despite the fact that there was, not only no evidence, but no evidence that there would be any evidence. There was really no pretext of logical pretext that which they could come at you all with. But despite all of that, they went right ahead. There was massive surveillance. I think it came out they may have an informant at different times. To me, that's an important factor about what took place in Denver, was that it showed the just total lawlessness in a way of the state in a case like this. I mean, to use probably millions of dollars of resources monitoring your every move for what were on their face essentially imaginary crimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole thing was so desperate. One of the things that has come out in our discovery is that they did have this, confidential informant who they had come in after we had been arrested. We were in jail now for 7 days. They didn't have enough evidence to just do it, clean. They brought in this confidential informant to just fabricate, and fill in the holes that they didn't have in evidence. And he just made up like that he had seen us do things. But the thing is, this guy was also had a camera strapped to him. There's no evidence of what he's saying on the camera. There's no evidence on any of the many, many security cameras around the station. I mean, it's so dirty from top to bottom. They just went for this, hoping that they would, terrify us. And I genuinely do think they did want to lock us up as well. But the evidence was just completely absent.
I think it's also, even if they didn't realize, like, even if, of course, their ultimate goal was to lock you guys up for being some of the lead protesters against the police killing of Elijah McClain, just for anybody who's tuning in now. Those were the charges against you that were dropped, were basically criminalizing your protest and your organizing protests. However, it also, I think, is meant to send a message to others who are protesting these police killings and who are organizing around them. Because the fact of the matter is, like, just the idea of being prosecuted is scary in and of itself, let alone possibly being locked up. Being prosecuted means you have to get lawyers. This has been ongoing for you guys for several months now, and you were facing like 48 years in prison, some crazy number. And I'm sure it upended your life and the lives of your comrades who were also being prosecuted. That's very disruptive to any individual. And so I imagine that was probably also one of the purposes of this, was to scare other people off. This is what's going to happen to you if you join these protests, if you organize around these protests.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We see this case dissolving. It doesn't have legs to stand on. And yet we actually have already been locked up. We were jailed for 8 days. And really the message for all of the people in the movement here who do in fact know us as peaceful protest leaders. I mean, we have been very openly and identifiably, at the front of these protests. And it's well known that these charges just do not correspond to what happened this summer. And so, the message to people here is, even if you are peaceful in what you're doing, even if you are supposedly within your rights, the police have the power to suddenly, out of the blue, abduct you, to put you in jail, to hold you for, really any period that they want to, and then to put you through this absolutely grueling and, yes, expensive process. I mean, I have been to court 20 times during this case, and that's during COVID. So I can't imagine how disruptive that would be to your life if it's all in person. So yeah, certainly the injustice is very deep. We're just grateful that it's not a lot deeper.
Talk about the response that you've gotten. I mean, I know that all of you have done a number of events for all sorts of community organizations, unions, colleges, and so on since the arrest has taken place. Talk about the response you got.
Yeah, well, the support has just been tremendous. And I think that that's just, a key component as to why, we've seen the case get this far. I mean, the district attorneys clearly have the power to push this all the way to trial, even if they, do intend to drop it. They could wait. They could continue to push us through this. So, if we want to know why do they feel compelled to drop it now, I think the question of people really paying attention to this and calling it what it is has been critical. And yeah, that support started, from the moment we were arrested. While we were still in jail, there was a tremendous outpouring of support, not just in Aurora and Denver, where there certainly was a lot of support, but also all around the country and even around the world. The Denver Area Labor Federation, which is this huge labor association representing 90,000 Denver workers. They issued this incredible statement just, calling out the case for what it was. From those first days when we were in jail, they, made such a clear statement that laid the groundwork for, it's an example that really went a lot deeper into the labor movement. And we've had labor organizations all around the country follow suit and sign on saying that, this isn't just an issue over there. It's not just an issue about racial justice and that doesn't touch us. No, they really made it their issue as well and talked about how, an assault on, rights in Aurora against protesters for Elijah McClain also really does have bearing on the rights for workers to stand up against their employers. And so much support like that. There have been, so many attorneys, civil rights attorneys, activists, educators, all these different people have stood up against this case. And, people in cities all over the country have even organized their own, committees to organize around this issue and draw attention to it. So I think that's been, undeniably a crucial force in bringing justice to this case.
Well, I know that there's a little bit left to go before total victory. I'm sure is much to be done regardless of that moving forward. You all have not stopped organizing, but where can people find out more about what's going on now, Lillian?
Well, people can continue to follow us. And the case, the best place to get updates is on denverdefense.org and on social media at Justice in Denver. And I would really encourage people to, continue paying attention to Elijah McClain's case as well. We haven't stopped fighting during all of this, and his case still needs justice. This has been an attempt to silence us, and it hasn't worked. But I think there is a reality that, people have been scared here. And so we need a lot of attention on, for one, the Attorney General, who has a lot of power right now. He has power to actually bring criminal charges against the killers. That is still in his hands. And, the Aurora Police Department still needs to deliver restitution to the McClain family. So we still need that pressure up. We'll continue to fight. And, we just really appreciate and can't overstate the importance of, the movement being part of this struggle.
No, well, we appreciate you and Joel, Eliza, Terrence, everyone, not only for all the organizing you did, but how strong you've stood in the face of this attack, which is inspirational, certainly to all of us here at Breakthrough News, and I think to people all around the country. And as you said, all around the world. Lillian House, anti-racist organizer, member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, thank you so much for joining us again here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Very happy to have you. Well, that's more or less what we have here for the show today, Rania. Once again, so much, not only that we learned, I think, but, that in my view is to take away hope for the future as well. Just a lot of mixed emotions. We also had some fun here on the show. As always, it really is a pleasure to be with you, Rania.
It's always a pleasure to be with you. And on an even more fun note, as you know, I'm in the middle of traveling. I'm not at home at the moment, so you can probably hear piano music in the background. Oh, nice. That would be. I don't know if you hear it. That would be apparently a really good time to practice piano. By well, my niece.
Who's practicing piano? Shout out to them.
One of my nieces.
Shout out to your niece.
Good for her. You got to practice.
Well, good for her. I'm glad that she's committed. I'm glad she's committed. No, that's great to hear because I definitely hear her. So I'm glad that you guys can. But this was an excellent show. I think this is the longest we've gone. I think we're almost at 3 hours.
And we didn't plan it.
We didn't plan it. I'm impressed with your stamina, as well as I own. And I love doing this show with you guys every week. It's always a pleasure. And I really love the guests we had, and I appreciate everybody who watched. And I feel like this is a good time to do one last shout out to our Patreon page. Those of you who are watching, you can support Breakthrough News. We don't just do this live stream, as you can see from our amazing YouTube channel. We produce on-the-ground reports. Eugene was recently in Haiti. I've got some stuff planned coming out of the Middle East soon. We also do interviews. We have On the Picket Line, one of the few labor reporting shows in the country at the moment. You can support all that work at patreon.com/breakthrough news. And I will throw it out to you, Eugene, for the last words.
Well, I appreciate that. That's a good last word, patreon.com/breakthrough news. Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/breakthrough news. Make sure you hit subscribe, hit the bell so you get alerts. Follow us at BT Newsroom across all your social media platforms. That's going to do it, though, for us this week on the Freedom Side here on Breakthrough News.